your attention, everybody. We're ready to start our meeting. I would like everyone in the back to come and grab a seat because this is an interactive experience. You're not sitting and listening to a lecture. You're actually lecturing to us. So I need as many people in the back room to move over and start to grab a seat. Now, let me start by saying thank you for everyone for coming. It's really important that we have the kind of participation that I hope we continue to have. It seems like we might have as many as 50 people. I was hoping for as high as 80 and at least 40. So we're in the sweet spot. Look around you. Look around at everybody. If there was ever a statement about the importance of community and democracy at the village level, you're staring at it now. We all need to be part of what's going on here. We all need to be part of this process. So I really appreciate everyone coming. There's been a lot of discussion on Act 46, a lot of articles in the paper and in the newspaper, and on television. As we proceed tonight, we are assuming that you know something about Act 46. But even if you don't know much or even anything, we need your perspective. We are at the stage in the process where we need ideas that will guide us and help us develop options. Mark Twain once said, "Aging is an issue of mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter." Thank you, I appreciate that. Up until last spring, that's the way I felt about the rumblings we've been hearing for the last few years about education from Montpelier. I figured Montpelier was an issue of mind over matter. If you don't mind, Montpelier doesn't matter. Well, that is no longer the case. Act 46 is a very complicated law. I am proud to say there are a number of attendees in this meeting here who have actually read the legislation from cover to cover and claim to understand it. I am not one of those people, but over the last few months I have developed a pretty good understanding of the law. Act 46 asks a lot of towns across the state, and there may be protests. It may be tweaked, the law may be tweaked, but if the law remains intact, this new law will require that the Dorset School Board must dissolve and become part of a larger entity. That is one of the requirements of Act 46. It seemed to me that the first question that had to be answered is whether this law is going to stick or if it will be shouted down as soon as the legislature reconvenes in January. Dan French and Jim Salzgiver helped me to identify 2 videos to address this question. The first was of a former school board member from the Northeast Kingdom. She cites her many years of experience. And she observes that once legislators get a law to this level, got to turn the page here, they don't rescind it. They may tweak it or revise it, but rarely does it go away. So she argues that we, as citizens of the state of Vermont, should proceed as if the law is going to stay on the books. And if you listen to Representative Sharp, he is more direct. He says unequivocally that the law is in place and it's going to stay there. So we don't get a lot of information by asking the question of, do we really need to react to this law because it's just going to go away. I was going to show you these 2 video clips, but I don't think they matter. And if you don't mind, then it doesn't matter. So we won't show those video clips. What I would like to share with you is some observations. First of all, I've attended a number of forums on Act 46, and I personally have not been pleased. I personally have poured vitriol over the heads of anyone from Montpelier who would listen. I believe that this law was passed to demonstrate to the electorate that the legislators were doing something. However, that being said, I went to the mat with Oliver Olson, who was one of the ardent advocates of this law. And he said a lot of things I didn't like and didn't agree with. But he said 2 things that made sense to me, which you need to hear. The first was, he said Act 46 was intentionally designed to be strict and require an immediate response from everybody throughout the state. It forces you to change your governance structure so that some school boards must dissolve and consolidate into larger units. And it has a cap on spending, so if your budget increases by a very small percentage, you will face a significant tax penalty. He said we did this on purpose because the way the budget process was going, school costs were rising every year and taxes were rising with them. And you know what they say about death and taxes. They never go away. He said the way things were going, this cycle would go on until the state reached a breaking point, and then everything would collapse. He said a collapse of our education system would cause a lot of human damage. Act 46 is unpleasant and has a stiff penalty for even a modest budget increase. But he is right in that Act 46 is forcing all of us to act and change. It is doing so while we still have wiggle room. Act 46 is requiring change during a time when adaptive change is still possible. So that's one reason why I think it's important. If we make mistakes or if we're adjusting, we're not up against the wall. We still have some flexibility. So that's one reason why I would argue it might make sense to pay attention to Act 46 and not ignore it. Second, the way Act 46 is structured, it gives opportunity to the school board level to come up with a response that is creative and appropriate to each of our schools. It is not a top-down mandate. When you first look at it, it seems like you're really restricted on the choices we have. But we have more room than we would have if the system collapsed. So, point one, change is necessary, and point two, you control it at the local level if you want to. So that to me sounded like a fair challenge. So even though there's a lot to disagree with about Act 46, the point is we're being forced to change. So, we move on to the next page. If we are forced to change, then we as a school board need your help. So I am handling the first activity. Our biggest fear in all of this is that under the structure of a new governance system, if the school board is dissolved, then we have to join with other school boards, say with Manchester and Floodbrook, which seem to be the options that people are suggesting. The biggest fear is that the Dorset School will be changed so that our kids no longer get the kind of education we believe they are getting now and that we believe they should continue to get. That is the fear. I call it the full package, that we're afraid that they won't get the full package if we change what we've got now. So my challenge to each of you at your tables is the first step. I have this activity that I'd really like to hear what you have to say. My challenge is I think this board members should sit at a table too and participate. Look at the Dorset School from your perspective. Think about it, what it did for you if you attended it, or your children, or your grandchildren, or the friends of your children. Think about everything you have heard about the Dorset School. Think in terms of academics, non-academic activities, sports, community involvement, cultural events, parent participation, real estate. In whatever context you know the Dorset School, I want you to think about that. And I want you to list 5 things that are good about it and should be preserved as best we can when we develop a new governance structure. If we have to move into a new governance structure, what do you think must be preserved is the most important thing from your perspective? Think about what it did, sorry, I jumped. So what are the most important elements of the Dorset School that should be preserved in the future? Think about it individually, so on yourselves, write them down, the first things that come to mind, and then discuss it. And if each table can prioritize a list of 5 or so, that would be great. We want to collect all the ideas, so scribble privately and communally to your heart's content, and we'll time it for about 15 minutes. If it gets quieter before then we'll move on to the next exercise. So has everyone got a pretty clear idea of what we'd like? What are the most important things in the Dorset School? And share it. See if everyone else at your table agrees. Thank you. I'm asking for feedback on what they think are the most important items, and then, or what you really came here to hear, and what you need to learn. Actually, let me tell you what we're going to do. I want to take a few minutes to get some feedback on what you just did, and if anyone wants to share, that would be great. And then I've asked Dan French, because I went around the tables and informally learned that a lot of people would like to have an overview of Act 46, that really people don't know what it's all about. So Dan had prepared a presentation that he gave at our last school board meeting, which was for the public to get that understanding. And we'll do a quick overview of Act 46 after I get a little bit of feedback. So humor me. Somebody stand up and tell me that this was a useful exercise, and share some of the ideas that you think are important in the Dorset School as it now exists.
Go ahead. Right? All right. So we listed off a few things. I think a couple of the items that resonated with me. A couple of the items that resonated with me are the farm to table that we have at the school here, and then also the school size. You know, it's the right size where the kids and the teachers can truly get to know one another. I think it's interesting because the company that I work for, it's a multinational company, it's been around for many decades, but when they reach a size in a factory of about 200 to 250 people, they split off and have another factory. And it's for this exact reason where you can develop real relationships one to another. So I think the size is an important aspect.
Wow, that's very interesting. Thank you for that. Anyone else want to come up and give a quick overview? I saw a hand over here. No? Oh.
It was my hand, but ours were similar. When I look at the 7 points that we wrote down, they all can be traced back to the size of the school. We appreciate the small class size, the academics, the ability to work closely with the teachers to differentiate learning. Val is on our list, the cafeteria, the farm to table is huge for everybody. The proximity of the school to our homes is a big concern. Choice High School is something that we all value. And one of our concerns, again related to size, is if we move into a bigger population, being the minority vote. We feel like we have a voice now, and if we're pooled into a larger pool, Dorset will be the minority. So our voice is a concern.
Thank you for that. Anyone else want to share anything? Oh, Diego. Stand close on the mic, Diego.
I'm just going to talk about, from the faculty point of view, I think that Dorset gave us a chance to really know each other as faculty and work very close together and get to know the kids. So that's one of the big concerns that we have of being part of a bigger district where it could be more impersonal. You wouldn't know who your colleague next door could be, or if they're going to be willing to collaborate with you as the way that we do here, and really to get to know all the students, because that's what we do here.
You'll be the last one, Justine, and then we'll move into the presentation.
Okay, thank you. So basically, a lot of the same points about the small school size, the quality of the teachers, but we wanted to add, our table wanted to add that there's a social strengthening within the town when the kids all come from the same geographic locale. Like, you get to know people within the same town through the children, through all those play dates that you're driving to. And it really strengthens the town itself. the fabric of the town, and that spills it over into town governance, because all the kids are, they're very knitted together. And the other thing, which means a lot to me, is the hands-on projects, which are easier with a small school. So you can have projects like the egg drop, where you've got the teachers climbing to the top of the gym, dropping each child's, contraption off the gym to see if the egg is, preserved. And you can do that sort of thing in field trips when you've got smaller groups of kids. And I think when you get into a bigger population, you're going to be doing more, I don't know, less of that, I suspect, because it's time consuming and it's a lot of work for the teachers. So that would be the main thing.
I'd like to say something on my own behalf. It's not necessarily reflective of discussion that we had at our table. I think it's a shame that you should even have to ask what we want to preserve in this school. This is a damn good school, and we should want to preserve everything that we've done. And we shouldn't have to give up any of it because of a lousy law. Now, it's true, the law, to some extent, is going to remain unchanged. Both the Republican candidates for governor, Bruce Lissman and Phil Scott, and the minority leader in the House, Don Turner, have said in the last few days that they want to have some real in-depth reviews about how this law is going to be used and what changes are going to have to be made. As we, I think, all know, one of the objectives of this law, and one of the things that would affect this town particularly, as well as many others, is that one of the objectives is to reduce the opportunity for parents to send their children to a school of their choice as being best for their children. The state would like to eliminate that to the greatest degree possible. And they may be very successful in doing that to some extent under this law. They don't address the real ways to reduce costs. And there are two that immediately come to mind, and I don't mean to offend anyone by talking about this. But one of the real problems in this state is that we have the lowest average ratio of children to teachers, 7-to-1. It's the lowest in the country. The average is somewhere between 12 and 15 students per teacher. If we raised that ratio to, say, 10 or 12-to-1, we could save millions of dollars. But that's not even addressed in Act 46. Another means by which costs could be reduced is that in this state we have 58 supervisory unions to handle 80,000 students. Just to give you an idea of how cockeyed that is. In New York City, there are 1,100,000 students in the public schools. They have 43 supervisory unions, which average about 125,000 students per supervisory union. In this state, we have 80,000 students and 53 supervisory unions. You could save a lot of money by doing something about that. I
Why
think.
don't we use this as an opportunity then to get an overview of Act 46?
Fine. I just wanted to make
What you're
the point.
saying, Ralph,
Yeah.
But what you're saying is that we should consolidate. You're agreeing with Act 46. So why don't we talk a little bit about what it comprises, and then we can get some more
I think
reactions later.
consolidation may be very worthwhile in some instances, but not necessarily the way they are forcing it to be done. And that's where the real problem is, because this does not attack the real reason that costs are as high as they are.
Okay. Well, thank you for all of your opinions, and I'll hand it over to the superintendent to give us a quick overview.
Good evening. I'm Dan French, Superintendent of the PRSU. PRSU. It works. It works sometimes. David asked me to give you about a 10-minute overview of Act 46. So this is a presentation we had used, was it a month ago or a few weeks ago at the Dorset School Board. So I'm going to go through this as sort of a highlight of some of the features with the assumption that you don't maybe know some of the technical aspects of Act 46. Firstly, anytime I talk about Act 46, I find it necessary to give you a basic primer on vocabulary terms used in talking about Vermont school district governance. First thing is a town school district. Town school district is sort of the basic building block of our governance system. This innovation goes back to about 1880 or so. You might have saw some slides here on the screen of some Dorset historic pictures of schools. There were approximately, I don't know, was there 4 schools in Dorset at the time? 12? Yeah, so 12 schools back in the 1880s sometime. Each one of those schools was its own school district. Sometimes you'll hear those schools referred to as the district school. They each had their own school board. In the late 1880s, the legislature said that's too complex. We're going to force those to consolidate, and we'll have one school district per town, and that's what we call today the town school district. Dorset today is a town school district. Town school districts under the law have to either operate a school or pay tuition for their students if they don't operate a school to go somewhere else to be educated. And I'll refer to that as an enrollment option. Sometimes we call it choice from a parent's perspective. Next, I won't say next, but another construct that we have in the law is what's called a union school district. This is when more than one town school district come together and form a school district. This happened a lot in the 60s in Vermont, in the 1960s, I should say. We have at least two in RSU. We have Courier and Meadowy, actually Floodbrook is one as well. So these are town school districts coming together to jointly operate a school. Slight difference, special kind of union school district, which Floodbrook is, or Mountain Towns Red is a what's called a red regional education district. These essentially are union school districts but they were formed under Act 153. Basically, were provided some special incentives and had to meet some timelines. This was a recent innovation, about 4 years old now, but they essentially are union school districts. And we have these things called supervisory unions. Supervisory unions are groups of school districts. This goes back to about 1910 or so in northern New England. It's not an uncommon structure. Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont share this kind of approach. Basically, districts are grouped under an administrative structure by the state, share a superintendent, central office, those kinds of functions. So that's a fairly old one as well. Sort of a newer flavor of that is what's called a supervisory district. These are larger entities, large K-12 districts with a single board that also function as a supervisory union. And we have 10 of those, about 10 in the state. Rutland City is a supervisory district. Burlington, Montpelier, they're supervisory districts. They have a single board, one enrollment option for all their students, and they function as a supervisory union under the law. So that's Vermont school district structure in one slide. Enrollment options. So this is what's been a point of confusion in Act 46, and it is certainly a point of interest for our districts, all of whom enjoy school choice to a certain extent. So enrollment option, basically under Vermont law, and Act 46 doesn't really change this, the enrollment option in a school district must be for the same for all the students in that school district. So if we take Dorset for an example, Dorset operates a school K-8 and has choice 9 through 12. That is the configurations of this district. That is this district's enrollment option. The law would say it would be unconstitutional, unfair for some Dorset students to have a different enrollment option than others inside the same school district. So that's sort of base law in Vermont. Supervisory unions, once again, are a different structure. These are a group of districts together. It's totally fine for in supervisory unions, its member districts to have different enrollment options. So Dorset, K-8 school with choice 9-12 can exist in the same supervisory union with Winhall, which has complete school choice K-12. It's not a problem under a supervisory union to have multiple school districts with different enrollment options. The first bullet's still true, always has been true though. In a single school district, you only can have one enrollment option for the students. So the challenge then, with a top-down sort of approach, Act 46, forcing districts to merge, you have to be careful how you merge. And this is the part I would suggest is local control to a certain extent under Act 46. You can do away with your choice or some part of it if you merge in a manner that causes that to happen. So you have to be cautious about merging so that if you want to preserve what you have, in Dorset's case, if you wanted to operate a K-8 school and have choice 912, Act 46 in the former Vermont law says you should merge with other districts who have the exact same enrollment option. So that's why when we're talking about Act 46 quite a bit, we talk about Manchester, Dorset, and Floodbrook because they have K-8 schools and have choice 912. But you could do this to yourself, and there have been some districts, not necessarily under Act 46, but recently Westford, I think Westford's vote is coming up next week. Westford has decided to do away with school choice to a certain extent in order to get some savings to merge with Essex. So you can do it yourself if you want. Not many of our districts want to do that. None of our districts want to do that. So I think it's important when we talk about what Act 46 is and what it isn't, it's to understand firstly what's in the law. Unfortunately, it's a simple paragraph, none of which you can read from back there, I'm sure. But I guess I'll read it to you. But these are the policy objectives of Act 46, and it's something our boards come back to repeatedly because when we're contemplating these changes, whether you agree with them or not, the first thing is to understand it, I would argue. So what the law says is by enacting this legislation, the General Assembly intends to move the state towards sustainable models of education governance. So this first phrase is an important one. Basically, the state's looking across that mishmash of configurations that I had on one slide there and saying we need to have a more sustainable model. In order to have a more sustainable model, we're going to force districts to merge. Legislation is designed to encourage and support local decisions and actions. So the idea is that school boards can make these decisions very well, control costs very well, control equity of opportunity. The challenge has been the school districts are operating in small little silos. So the idea with Act 46 is to put local control over a bigger regional school district. So the legislation is designed to encourage support local decisions that provide substantial equity and quality and a variety of educational opportunities statewide. Number 2, lead students to achieve or exceed the state's education quality standards as adopted by the state board. 3, maximize operational efficiencies to increase flexibility to manage, share, and transfer resources with the goal of increasing the district level ratio of students to full-time equivalent staff. So there's that issue about staffing right there in the law. 4, promote transparency and accountability. And 5, delivered at a cost that parents, voters, and taxpayers value. So that's Act 46 in a nutshell. It is a very large piece of legislation, though. There's a lot of technical aspects to it. So I think of Act 46, it has 2 components. One is what we're talking about tonight a bit, which is the merger aspect. It has another component, which we'll be talking about more in the coming weeks, which is the financial capping mechanism of our budgets. But the merger options, essentially, the state has declared in Act 46, based on those goals on the previous slide, there is a preferred governance structure to achieve those goals. And that preferred governance structure is the supervisory district. That was that district that also operates as a supervisory union. Rutland City, Burlington, Montpelier, they're large. They have one board. They have one enrollment option for all the students. So the state is declaring in Act 46 that is the preferred structure. And there's 2 ways you can do that. You can do it fast and slow. The state is providing some incentives we call the accelerated option or the conventional option. There's some money involved. There's some opportunity to do some near-term, short-term savings because the state acknowledges there's going to be some costs with merging. But the state also acknowledges that not every place in the state can do a preferred governance structure. I would argue our supervisory union is one of those cases because we have many districts that have different enrollment options. So it's pretty difficult for us to think about becoming a preferred governance structure. So under the law, the state says there is an alternative. For those of you that can't do the preferred, as long as you can make a case that you can operate and achieve those policy goals as a supervisory union, what that means is you're going to have different districts under one structure. You have to make a case that you can educate all your kids equitably at high levels and be efficient and all that kind of stuff. So that's called the alternative governance structure. It's still a supervisory union. But even if you choose to maintain a supervisory union, you have to merge down to the least number of districts practicable. And what that means is that if you have 3 K-8 districts with choice 912, you're still going to have to merge under the supervisory union to get down to the least common denominator. There are some tax incentives also involved with doing that if some of the districts qualify as what's called a red. If you don't merge, basically there's this threat in the background of Act 46 and the state's going to do it for you. Basically, for those that aren't going to do the preferred structure, they have to send a report. Each one of our boards that doesn't merge under preferred We'll have to send a report to the Secretary of Education November 30th, 2017. The Secretary of Education then looks at all those reports, those proposals, and comes up with a plan for the state for those things, those districts that haven't merged. The state board reviews that plan and ultimately either adopts it or modifies it. And the idea is that the state landscape in terms of school district government looks different by 2019 under this law. How do we merge? And that's sort of the essential issue before our boards now. The merger process itself is nothing new. This has been around since the 60s in the union school district process. There's nothing new in Act 46 that talks about how to do this. We would fall back on old law. Basically, the school board can initiate the process. The school board, as long as the budget for that study is going to be less than $25,000, has within its authority to vote and say, yes, we want to participate in a merger study committee. Merger study committee, I use the analogy of it's like letting go of a balloon for the board. The school board starts the process, but they don't run that process. That merger study committee has a life of its own. It's a public body that's governed by the open meeting law. Usually it's largely composed of community members from the member districts that are seeking to merge. So they'll be holding public meetings and so forth. And they have a very specific task. It isn't a creative writing exercise or a debate. They have about 13 questions they have to answer. They have to prepare a merger study proposal. Once that proposal's ready, they send it to the state board. The state board can tweak it, send it back for review. If the state board approves it, bottom line is it comes back to the voters in every single of the merged community. So the school board can initiate the merger process by saying they want to form a study committee. Ultimately, it's going to come back to you as voters for approval. What comes back to you for approval is a template, these 13 questions that are designed to give you all the answers to a lot of the questions that you're going to start surfacing in the coming weeks. We have some timelines, and that's sort of time of the essence kind of issue for our districts. We're probably not going to do the preferred governance structure, but that's really, the accelerated option would really require communities to vote this spring. We're most likely going to start off pursuing the alternative governance option. I think right now, that looks like, at the earliest, bringing something before the voters next year, and probably, I think, hopefully after the gubernatorial election, so we can understand, firstly, how the legislature might tweak the law this winter, and then secondly, what a new governor might do. So what we've been doing as a group of districts, we've been trying to work together. As we've had some great success over the years. We have 11 school districts, approximately 54 school board members. We can bring a lot of people to bear and expertise to bear on studying the law. We've been doing that this summer. We've been going to any meeting we can go to in Montpelier, talking with our legislators, talking to policymakers, really firstly just trying to understand what's in the law. Secondly, what we've been doing is trying on different scenarios. This creates problems often in the media because we're putting out hypotheses, what if happens if this happens, and people are assuming that's what we're going to do. Or in the case when school boards are doing their due diligence, talking to their neighbors about what would this mean. They've been trying on the law a little bit to see where its problems might be for us. And now we're in this phase I call community engagement, where the boards are all reaching out to their communities to get some input from you, particularly around this issue should the board move forward with forming a study committee. And then ultimately the first milestone for our communities will be forming a study committee. So that's kind of where we're at right now. None of our districts have formed study committees yet. We're all pretty much where you are tonight, which is becoming familiar with the law, doing some initial community engagement about what's in the law, what isn't in the law. How's that?
Pretty quick.
Okay.
Okay, so if we can, I'd like to continue with the exercises that we'd outlined. But if there are some burning questions, then by all means. Patty, if you have a burning question, then I definitely want to hear what it is. Why don't you come? No, you have to speak in the microphone because.
Hi. I think I'm going to give Dan an opportunity, I'd like to think, rather than putting him on the spot, and explain to everybody that passing this act is a tremendous upheaval for people around the state, no doubt, and all our board members that are volunteers are spending countless hours and going to be spending even more, not to mention superintendents like you going around and doing these meetings. Can you let us know that in a few years, how is Dorset and the Dorset School going to be in a better position? And not counting the tax incentives that are actually paid for out of the ed fund. So it's questionable about what benefit that is to everybody in the long run. But if you can just give us an idea of how we're going to be better off in a few years.
Are you interested in answering a loaded question?
From Representative Conline, absolutely. I'd be honored to answer her question. Let me think about it for a minute. No. With our communities, I would say firstly that it's unlikely we're going to realize any financial savings from this. We've, for whatever reason, as a group of districts have worked together pretty successfully, which is not necessarily that typical of a large multi-district supervisory unit. So we have achieved a lot of savings, sort of low-hanging fruit. I don't expect this merger process to do much for us financially. We also, as you know, we're home of the only regional education district in the state, essentially. So we are a district that's also expanded. We've taken on the Red, the Mountain Towns Red, which is a result of 4 districts merging to a single district, and also then adding Win Hall to our school district. So we've done some stuff at the SU level to make ourselves bigger, to spread the cost even more among more districts. That's already been achieved. So there's no low-hanging fruit on a governance merger. I think, first issue that I'm prompted to react to is this difference between the school and the district. They're two different things. So when we talk about Act 46, I'll call it phase 1, what we're talking about tonight is really about merging school districts. It doesn't anticipate any change at the school level. So in spite of your first exercise where you're talking about all the hopes and dreams and things you like about your school, nothing I heard as your superintendent, who is familiar with the programs of the school, would be affected by governance merger. Two different things. On the other hand, though, I would say it's working really well here. So governance change isn't necessarily going to enhance the quality of the program in the school. But I think there are a couple places, and if I look at our system, that means across the whole group of districts, where we would possibly have some opportunities to both largely educationally to improve outcomes for kids. I think you're going to get to that as a group of people tonight. One of your last questions tonight is to start to explore that a little bit. So I'll gladly chime in at that point. But I think there are some opportunities. There are some places, not necessarily in Dorset, but there's some places as a system where I think we could do a better job in early education. I think in Dorset, in Manchester, and Floodbrook, we could do a better job at the middle level. But I'll chime in a little bit more later on that, because you're all going to struggle with that a bit. Hopefully that answers some of your question anyway.
I had an idea. Changing the 2 mics, since that one will be stationary.
Okay, yeah.
So why don't we?
I don't know
We
if
can
it's a
even.
cord or the mic though.
Well, that's why I figured we'll stick with it.
Jim, we're just going to switch out this one.
Might be the cord, Jim.
Oh, okay. All right, I think he's got it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so my question's more around the Dorset's a net giver into the educational system, correct? Taxes, we don't use all the money we make in tax education doesn't necessarily go to Dorset School, we get back to the state, which gets pooled, correct?
That's correct.
Does that play in at all in any of these discussions? For example, if we took the path of arguing that we shouldn't make any changes, would that be a viable argument if we are actually a community that is giving back into the pool of money, and a part of that money being generated is because people are moving here for our school and generating that money? So it's kind of, to me, and I'm sure the answer is no, but, is there any, to me it just seems kind of silly that we're actually a net provider of finance, and what we're doing is actually potentially destroying that by, let's say, leveling the playing field. Why would we move to Dorset? Why would we move to Manchester, where the taxes are lower, the housing is more affordable? To me, we're kind of, biting off our own hand a little bit on this one, potentially from a financial perspective. So I wonder if there's any play in that at all in the decision-making process, or in arguing that we shouldn't make a change or should. I'm just curious to know how that fits into the whole.
So if you couldn't hear it, the question is asking, recognizes that Dorset probably, well, Rob knows better than anybody, but Dorset probably gives around $10 million a year to the state and gets back about $4.5 million, or less than that, right? $5 million? So we give an awful lot of money to the state that we don't see. And that would solve a lot of problems here in a heartbeat, because we work hard to do the best we can with our budget. As far as I understand, there is no intention to shift that. And now you're getting me to think of some of the odd ideas I have had. I've thought at times that we should file our own ACLU suit, because we can't exercise as much freedom to provide for our kids as other schools do. But I don't have enough of the data, and I would just sound like I was a banging drum without making sense, because most people assume that a place like Dorset has everything it can possibly want for its kids. So that is a sore point that you've raised, and I have no answer to that. But it is an issue. Okay, so we'd like to move into the next step. Jim is going to talk. We figure that it would be helpful for people to understand, what does the BRSU provide us? We are part of a larger SU, and we are aware that that costs us money. What do we get for that money? And Jim has prepared a very interesting presentation on that.
Thank you. Yeah, not sure how to do this. Yep, I'm okay. Yeah, basically, honestly, it came up when I was talking to this table over here that I think it's probably fair to say that, the school board, the superintendent, over time has, had a goal of communicating to the community what we're doing in our schools, but we probably haven't done a good enough job of it. And I think that, we're kind of realizing, there are a lot of people who don't understand, fully what we're accomplishing in this school. And what I'd have to say is, where we fell down even much more is having people understand what the supervisory union is, what it is to us, and how we've been operating with the other schools within the supervisory union. And so, here, before we decide what we're going to become, thought it might make some sense to sort of address what we are today and how we've gotten here. So the path we've been on, the way we tend to look at it is, the Dorset School has been working with other BRSU schools, certainly as long as, I've been on the school board for 8 years, and we've consistently worked more closely with the other schools. And this, what we define it as an education system. So instead of operating strictly, Dan used the word silo before, and if you look at, instead of operating in a silo and just doing our own thing without any regard for what others are doing, I think we've tried to, have the schools work together to be better as a group than we could be individually. So I broke this down into two different forms of advantage that we've gotten from being a part of that educational system. This looks a little small now, but the first examples are essentially cost savings. Since everybody's interested in property taxes, how do we get an advantage of working together to actually reduce costs? What can the supervisory union do for us to help us reduce costs over what we would have had if we were a standalone case? So the first ones will be cost savings, then we'll get into the more important one, which is actually the educational advantages of being a part of an educational system. So these are some of the things that we've done over the years. The business manager function. We used to have a business manager in the school and just working for our school, and it worked quite well and all, but over time we moved, and every school within the supervisory union moved to have one central business manager, have the finance handled centrally. The impact on us, actually, if you look from year to year, the first year we did this, actually our reduction in spending in this area was actually $35,000 the very first year. Then they had to add some resources at the SU, and right now I'd say we're roughly at a 20,000 plus per annum savings just from centralizing the business manager function. Group purchasing, it makes sense. You're a part of a larger group. Things like, our printer and copiers, we just decided to do those across the whole group. That actually, it's kind of surprising when you look at the numbers. That saves just the Dorset School about $3,000 a year. Fuel oil, we're probably saving a larger amount on an annual basis by, purchasing for a full year's usage in advance as a group. So we put it out for a bid as a group. Special ed transportation. We used to, when I first joined the board, our way of handling special ed kids needing transportation was, one of our primary ways of doing that was with taxis. And that certainly left something to be desired from a safety and a control standpoint, but also it was very expensive. So I put down here, in looking at the numbers, probably we're saving at least right now. If you look out front, there are several vans and school buses with BRSU on the side. That's the BRSU handling our special ed transportation, which actually is managed out of here by Derek Chalmers. So just by moving that to a centralized, we're saving at least $5,000 per student per year. If you look back at the numbers, the year before we made that switch, we had only a couple of kids that we were providing transportation to, and our budget for that, what we ended up spending, was $35,000 in 1 year to transport just a couple of kids. This past year, we have a multiple of that number of kids, and we spend about half of that amount. So, it's had a significant impact spending-wise. Professional development, we're saving some money, hard to set it up, but when you end up having teachers from different schools, administrators from different schools being able to join together for professional development things, you tend to, you've got enough mass to actually do it in a more efficient way, provide more opportunities. Energy efficiency, this is kind of a combo, with Ellen here, Ellen Maloney here. I'll say this is, I give some credit to the BRSU, I give some credit to the Dorset Energy Committee, where we've, on the BRSU has helped us a lot with all our lighting systems. We've actually done a couple of major upgrades on that. Electricity usage through the school, even while we're using more computers, things like that, the number of kilowatt hours we use is down about 30% from 6 years ago. Fuel use down by about 20% plus due to efficiency steps we've taken. Special ed is an area where we're going to be seeing how much it ends up impacting our bottom line. Special ed, we just combined this year special ed. That was mandated by the state, and now special ed is actually managed out of the supervisory union. It used to be handled school by school. Special ed is a big part of our budget. It's about 20% of our spending. We got some money back from federal state government, and so it ends up about 10%. We don't know how much we're going to save, but it creates, working together in that way, creates opportunities to create efficiencies. One of our key things, and we spent a lot of time on, with all these efficiency sort of steps, one key thing is not losing what we have and what we value. It's down to David's question about what we value. And on the special ed front, trying to ensure that we provide opportunities for savings, but we keep, we're very proud of our special ed program here, and we keep the value that we've created. One other thing, when Floodbrook and Windhall joined the supervisory union a few years ago, we did a financial study at the time, came up with, in the end, having those schools join and spread the costs across all the different schools saved all of the schools in the group about $100,000. Our share of that is about $16,000 a year. So these are just some of the financial impacts of joining together. Now, on the more important end, education, how are we using our working together as an educational system to improve the quality of education? One is simply, moving administration, meaning, the finance, the human resources, all of the reports that have to be filed at federal and state levels, et cetera. Moving that to the supervisory union level leaves people like Rosanna Moran, our principal, provides a lot more opportunity for her to focus on the important things, and for our teachers hopefully to be able to have additional time to focus on education instead of paperwork. We've also working together with the other schools, principals. This, when you think about what I said about the silos before, we actually created, the principals get together on a monthly basis, create relationships, provide the opportunity to support each other, just to ask questions to the principal down the road, which frankly didn't exist so much before. Amongst teachers, trying to create the same thing, allow a 4th grade teacher from the Dorset School to talk to every 4th grade teacher in all the other schools within the supervisory union. It's a good support that can help us create better educational outcomes. The instructional leadership team is something that was put together at the SU level to try to help give us the opportunity to continue to be innovative. 10 teachers get picked from across all the schools. They meet on a monthly basis, and they're looking at ways to create innovation, to provide opportunities that they discuss with the principals, ways to move education forward in our schools. Professional development, I mentioned before, working together has a positive impact. Curriculum development. This was another thing the state actually mandated that we centralize, but when you realize that almost all of our schools send the students when they finish here onto the same high schools, the ability to create to do two things. One, when you put all those people together and try to come up with the best idea for curriculum, the hope is that having these people work together, they can actually, you take the best ideas from everybody who's involved in the process and create the strongest curriculum from picking the best ideas from everyone. It also gives us the advantage when we send our kids off to high school, then as we're feeding into like a Burr and Burton, that most of those kids come into that school pretty much at the same level and hopefully adequately prepared for the rigor of what they're going to have in their education when they hit high school. Personalized learning plans. Having all of our, having all our schools implement, this is a key to, our part of our, educational, plans for the future, with our kids. We're having each kid, we're trying to personalize learning, create an opportunity for each kid to take a part and take some ownership, in their education. We implemented personalized learning plans across all the schools. It's actually a lot easier when you have all the schools operating together instead of having 5 or 6 schools trying to each come up with their way to implement something as complex and difficult as personalized learning plans. Same goes essentially for measurements of academic achievement. We all implemented a new testing scheme that we've used. It's the old kneecap tests were taken infrequently. Results were extremely delayed, and so we came up with we actually implemented across all the schools a new testing regime that is much more, creates more useful information for the teachers, for the parents, and for the board to know whether or not our kids are actually learning. Implementing SBAC this year, the Common Core curriculum, having done that as a group with the map testing made it a lot easier to be able to accomplish, implementing a brand new testing scheme. Special ed, again, I went over special ed before, but I probably don't need to do more. Technology, additionally, we've been able to, take advantage of of using, a single platform across the schools. Not, sometimes hiccups, but, we're trying to, come up with one approach and be able to support one approach, for all of our schools, all of our teachers. So that actually feeds in when you get to, on the technology side, also an important thing is the information, when you're operating all the schools, across, we're able to have consistent data, be able to compare how the schools are doing versus one another versus the state level. So we have actually better data coming out. So that was, probably too much on the path that we've been on. As school board members, I think we all feel that we've gained a significant advantages from working together in that way. But we are going to have to change our structure, and we see advantages. But that, one of the questions, should we continue on that path? They're definitely, trying to present there are reasons to continue on that path. That's not the only way we can go, though. And that's kind of what we're here for, is to discuss, get your ideas on whether it makes sense to continue on that path or be open to other opportunities.
So, thank you very much, everybody. So quickly, the first exercise was to, if we must change, if Act 46 is implemented, what must we preserve? And that's what I was asking you, and why I wanted the ideas about the Dorset School and its impact on the kids and the community. Second, Jim outlined what does the BRSU give us, and the reason that's important is because one of the choices we'll be making is, do we try to stay within the whole BRSU structure, or should we go off on our own? And I call it the BBA ecosystem, that if we stay with the BRSU, we're part of a whole group of people that feed into BBA. And so that's why he presented this. So you are all aware of some of the benefits, both cost-wise and in terms of enrichment from the BRSU. The third thing, and Jennifer Allen will come and talk about that, is what possibilities might open up because of Act 46. So.
So I'm not here to sell Act 46 to you because I feel like we just got handed a bag of lemons. But I work in healthcare, and I have a husband who owns a business in the state, and we are handed lemons on a regular basis, more like monthly instead of annually. And what it's forced us to do in private business and in a medical practice is to constantly be innovating. So it's a workaround. We're always looking for those workarounds to get what we need to operate our businesses, to be able to provide high quality services to our customers. And in this case, our customers are the kids that live in this community, and we need to make sure that we preserve the product for them, because ultimately that's what we're all here for, is for the children in Dorset. So as we look forward, and we have to be innovative and we have to look for new opportunities, we're looking at a new governance structure. I don't think any of us know what that means. I don't think any of us know what it looks like, but it's a great opportunity for us to make a wish list. And if there are gaps in what we have here, or if there are dreams that we have, maybe this is an opportunity for us to start to talk about those. We have an amazing resource in Vermont, I think statewide, in that we produce incredibly well-prepared kids who go out and unfortunately often leave our state and don't come back. And I think in the southern part of our state, we're facing economic challenges of a lack of diversification in our economy. And we need to draw people here. We need to draw businesses here. And we need to draw people to our community who would like to work here, purchase homes here, put their kids in school here. And one of the biggest draws for that to happen is not just our public schools, but our school systems. We have amazing both public and private choices in our communities. We have independent schools where we have K-12 sending districts. We have all these amazing choices. And so for me personally, I'm not really interested in eliminating choice. I'm interested in enhancing choices that we have. So what I think we would like to ask you to do now is to take a look more forward and talk about and think about what we're missing here. We have people who have owned businesses and run major corporations here. We have people who've grown up here, stayed here, taught here, worked here. What can we be doing better? Where should we be looking for growth opportunities or increased educational opportunities for our kids? And if money weren't an object and we didn't have any restrictions, what would be on your list? And I don't expect you to come up with genius ideas in the next 10 or 15 minutes, which is basically what we're allotting for this exercise. But this is another opportunity for you to leave here and over the next couple of days or weeks, be thinking of some of those things and popping an email to one of us here or to Dan or to Rosanna or to whatever friend you know up here who can get it to us. But it's time to dream a little bit that we need to make some lemonade here. And I think we can do it because we always do it. So what I'd like to ask you to do is take a little time amongst yourselves and talk about what we might do better, what we may dream about a little bit, and write it down on these tablecloths in front of you. We'll ask you to share again after the exercise is over, and then we'll let you get about your evening. We really appreciate your time tonight. We know it's difficult making time, taking time away from your families to come participate in things like this. So thank you very much, and we'll let you talk again. Thanks. Is everybody ready to maybe give a little summary of what their conversation has been like? Hello? I'll touch my nose. What do I do, this, Candace? Would anyone like to come up and summarize their group's discussion? I'm just looking for a couple of points. You don't have to solve the world's problems. Okay, so increased extracurricular clubs that kids design, the first Lego League, service learning, community volunteer projects, trail works, village green, library beautification, more sports, professional development, increased interaction with retired members of the community, broader exposure to other cultures, diversity, expand kids' involvement in farm to school, use Val's experience, and Floodbrook. That's all great stuff. I like it. How about you guys?
Well, the ability to offer more specialized education like languages, the more advanced arts courses, music and math, and fewer kids would go to private schools.
Thank you. Thank you. Put a big circle around that one. You guys have anything you'd like to add? I'm coming to you since you're not coming to me. Positives, things that dreams, what we want, what we think this might bring for us. Okay, that's okay. That's all right. Write down your notes from that part too. Okay. Anyone else? You guys were very talky.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just like to give you fans a little bit of a lesson here. We all pay taxes, or at least I hope we all do. And just understand for a minute that 13% of your tax dollars go to the organization of this town, the town manager, the road crew, etc. 40% goes to education here. It also pays for high school or boarding school or wherever you want to go. Have the kids have that option. 47%, as was mentioned before, but not in percentage terms, goes to Montpelier. Montpelier, the people that's putting this Act 46 to us. I've heard an awful lot of talk this evening about savings here and managing this and we're mandating that. Nowhere have I heard from Act 46 the benefit for the children, the students, and this school. A lot of people have moved here because of this school and what this town has provided for the children, both the children that grew up here and the ones that have come here to live. And I think we ought to all be thinking about that. Almost heard tonight David saying that we're just about bound to dissolve the Dorset School Board. A couple of members will be representing us, but what has been built over the years, I spent 9 years on the board here, 7 on Burton's board, and the rest of the time haggling and standing up and giving people hell. Thank you very much, Jim, for mentioning children here tonight, because you're the only one that did. So that's about all I have to say, but I'm really disappointed in where this is going. And I'd put in mind of Germany between 1930s and 40s when I was alive, when the state took over everything. The parents delivered the children to the state and they were brought up, and we saw what that did for us. So you can have your good mic back again. This one ain't worth anything.
Thank you. I have 3 kids in this school, I should say, and I think I did mention children. It's very important to all of us, I know, and it's what we talk about at the school board level all the time. There goes one of them right now. It is about the kids, and that's why we're here. You guys have any brilliant ideas? Multi-town middle school, 6 to 8, 5-day-a-week PE, full-time guidance counselor, health curriculum, farm to school, content-specific academics, for example, engineering and writing, more extracurricular activities, especially 6 to 8 for an after-school environment program, enrichment program. I'm reading sideways and upside down. And what was that last one? More student voice. More student voice. Good stuff. Anyone else have anything they'd like to add?
I would love to see something like Burton's Success Program that they just instituted several years ago, brought down even as low as the elementary school level. Because if we do end up in a scenario where we have larger students from different communities all being in the same school, I think it's going to be really critical to make sure that all the students have the kind of support. Not every student has the kind of support that most Dorset parents do provide to them. And I can't imagine an education system taking on students who don't have the kind of support that Dorset parents provide. And that we would need something like the Success Program to help support the children that don't have that support at home.
Thank you. Oh, here we go.
All of these suggestions are very valid and very desirable, but you don't need Act 46 to implement them. In fact, Act 46 will probably inhibit many of them.
That's actually very reassuring to me that we can do all this without Act 46, in spite of Act 46. You want to wrap it up?
I do. All right, everyone, thank you very much for all the comments. I know that there's a little bit of impatience of where we're going with all this. When I started, I opened up with a quote from Mark Twain. So I decided to quote from another man of American letters, John Wayne, who said, "True courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway." So we are scared to death. We're not sure where this is going to take us. If I could, I would keep it the way it has been. I like the local control and I like the things that we have, but I'm not sure we can afford to do that. So our next steps are, we can join a study group to explore our options, or we can wait out Act 46. Now, the board, we have the option to join a study group to look at our future governance options. The money is already available. By law, we as the school board do not need your permission. We have the authority. But I do not believe this is one of those times when it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. we want your input and your support so that if we, too, look into a study group. So let me continue with the steps. We could join a study group or wait out Act 46. We could review the options present, and if we do join the study group, the next step would be to review the options presented by the study group. And then the third step would be we as a board would make a recommendation for a governance change on which you would vote. And then the fourth step would be to vote on the recommended governance change. And the other option is to do nothing, which is essentially to hope that Act 46 goes away. And if it does go away, I think it's great. But I think that we need to look into options and be prepared. And hopefully, if Act 46 goes away, we still improve our school anyway. So I don't like step number 4. I don't like doing nothing. I don't like sitting back and waiting to see what Montpelier tells us to do, because it means we're giving up local control without a fight. So at some point, we as a school board are going to come back to you with a recommended plan. And I really don't want you all to reject it just because you weren't included in the process. So I'm asking you now, as a group, do you believe it makes sense for us to proceed with participating in a study group?
Yes.
That is unanimous. Okay, thank you. And second, are you willing to empower your school board to assess the data that the study group comes up with and then give you a recommendation on which you will vote? So you're actually giving us a lot of power to take this information and try to see what kind of shape makes sense. Are you willing to give us that power?
Would we have access to the information as well, or just your decision on it?
I think we will try to give an argument we'll give you the background as to what we heard and why we went this direction. We would certainly justify it. And a lot of it's going to be formulated by the study group, which will be made up of a cross-section of people, including town members. So if anyone here wants to be on the study group, you should let us know. You would have the option to really shape things. Can we make that an option to look at the numbers of privatizing?
Yeah, the study group certainly could do that. They have once again, sorry I depicted, it's not a creative writing exercise. They have a discrete number of questions they have to answer as part of, and essentially it's 2 questions. One, does it make sense to do it, or no? So oftentimes study committees can end up saying it doesn't make any sense. But if it does make sense, they have to answer a series of questions. One of those questions in the law is question number 13, which says some other issues that the study committee wants to mention. So there is sort of a catch-all provision in the law that allows them to consider other issues.
The study committee takes on, I think the study committee takes on the job of, they kind of have an idea of what they're going to study, but that can change during the study process.
That's correct.
So, you can end up saying that, okay, we think the most likely case would be to create a supervisory union with, with fewer districts. Once they get into that process, they may decide that's a bad idea and there are better ideas. But I think, they tend to go into the process with sort of an idea. People within the study committee, which includes, actually the school board sort of give up control once it goes to the study committee because, they're relatively, the school board members may very well be outnumbered by community members on the study committee. And the study committee is made up of representatives from different towns. So they kind of, anybody within that study committee group can start to propose to others within the study group, to look at different options.
So you're saying the study committee isn't necessarily a Dorset study committee, but it's an SU study committee?
It's a study committee amongst the groups, amongst the districts looking at the possibility of merging. So the study committee, initial study committee that's, that if you look at the agenda for tonight's meeting, there's a description of the study committee process and the way it's mandated in section 706, it's a state law thing. there's a process, and you end up, the districts that are considering the possibility of merging, which if we looked at it with Manchester, Dorset, and Mountain Towns red, then those three would get together and there would be reps from all of them on the study committee.
Yeah, I feel that we're misinformed as to what the study committee represents and who beyond the committee. I thought that it was for Dorset, not the SU and supervisory unions in general. So now we're looking at it as.
Yeah, the study committee has nothing to do with the SU. SU has no role in this at all.
We're not looking at it just as Dorset.
Yeah, yeah.
And the Dorset School Board.
Right, so the study committee is not it's a formal entity under the law. It's actually called a merger study committee. So it's not let's explore our options committee. It's a formal action. That's why I think the chair, David, tonight was asking for sort of some feedback. The board can initiate that process with its other neighbors to commission a merger study committee to look at merging districts. So every single district that's involved in the potential merger has representatives to that committee. It is not, a merger committee cannot be composed by definition of just your school board, because you can't merge with yourself.
Could I say something about that? I think it's very informative to be a member of the study committee, to find out what other entities are doing and what their thoughts are, and it could even assist the members from Dorset in their thinking. But I think that you should bear in mind throughout the process that your obligation is to do the best you can for this school and this community, and that you can't be influenced to the point where you think you've lost control of the process for your school. So it's good to be involved, but don't necessarily accept what the majority says in this case. Leave the door open for further discussion and further decisions.
Thank you for that. Ellen?
I'm wondering if the study committee's meetings will be open or closed?
It's subject to the open meeting law. Okay? Thank you very much, everybody. I think it's been very helpful.
For your study committee to consider is becoming ambassadors to encourage and invite Danby and Sunderland to consider closing their doors, bringing their kids in. This is about filling seats. We fill the seats. I've heard a lot of people suggesting great enrichment programs, from engineering to success program. We can do that if we fill seats with students from other schools. And that's one thing, that's a big positive for Act 68. It gives schools the opportunity to look at that. We can take kids like that in, fill these seats, and then we'd have more money, and we'd all have better opportunities, I think. So I would ask the study committee to consider that as well.
Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. We now have an official and already announced school board meeting, so you're welcome to stick around, but the Mets do start in about 10 minutes.
They're really exciting.
They're really exciting. Thank you, everybody. Okay, we've completed our Act 46 community engagement, and I'm calling the meeting to order. It is now 8:11. First, I don't think there'll be any public comment. I think we had a fair amount of that already. So, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Second?
Okay, so Vicky moves and Jim seconded. Is there any discussion about the minutes?
They were short.
I like Dan's minutes.
They were short. If there's no, I didn't see anything wrong. So
Nope.
If there's no further discussion, all in favor of approving the minutes as written, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay.
I think if anybody has any ideas on minute takers,
We need to hire a minute taker. It shouldn't be, we shouldn't have to rely on our superintendent to do that. But we got to figure that out.
Is there compensation for it?
There is.
$25 an hour.
So it is.
Really? Wow. That's a good job.
That's what the last minute figure.
Including the time
Healthcare?
to write up the minutes?
No,
Yeah.
no healthcare. But the expectation is the person is reasonably efficient at using those hours. Because how, if Nancy did it, I was concerned when I heard the hourly at first, but then, it actually, I think it wasn't that many hours.
I don't get paid when I do it, so you get what you pay for when I do it.
You're on salary like me. You don't get paid for all the extras. You just do them.
Okay, we're gonna move beyond all this brouhaha. And we've approved the minutes, so now we get to hear the report of the superintendent of schools.
All right, good evening. First item I have for you is a recommended action item to approve the model policy on prevention of hazing, harassment, and bullying of students. This is a mandatory policy. Adopting a policy is a two-step process on the part of the board, so tonight you'd be, if you're so inclined to approve it, and then we would warn it in the paper, and then you'd vote on it a second time, and then it would be adopted and actually become the law of the land, so to speak, for your school district. This initiative would replace 3 current policies that you have. Current policies on hazing, harassment, and bullying are now being promoted to be replaced by the state with the policy you have in your packet. It's a requirement of the law that the boards adopt a policy at least as stringent as this model policy. This is a mandatory, what we construct as a mandatory policy in the district. That means we try to have the same mandatory policies among all our districts for efficiency in terms of implementation. This policy was brought before the policy committee. Jim's on that committee. And the policy committee supported the idea of not tweaking this policy legally, but keeping it as it is, as the model that you should consider. So I recommend you approve this tonight to get the adoption process started.
So I understand that it brings together 3 older policies. Was that the reason that this was rewritten, or was there another reason that a new policy was put together?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think, yes, I think there was an interest in bringing them together under a single initiative. Historically, hazing goes back in time as sort of one of the first issues of this type that was represented in policy, and then the harassment initiative. Some of this comes nationally. It comes out harassment, and then more recently bullying. So I think there was some interest in particular bringing hazing into sort of a modern policy construct where it was sort of out there on its own from like 15 years ago. On the other hand, I think there were some new considerations at the federal level that pushed the state to have to update and cause you to update your policies as well.
So is a lot of this language borrowed from a state template?
Yep, a model that's basically...
It tweaked only by, very tiny, nothing substantial whatsoever.
Was the old language more generated here or in the BRSU? Because the language is different.
Yeah, no, the language we had before in both hazing, harassment, and bullying was largely the model policies pushed by the state at the time. They, once again, though, hazing was written maybe 10, 12 years ago.
Right.
Harassment maybe 5 years ago, 7 years ago. Bullying last 3 years. So they were authored at different times. This language, I think from a policy standpoint, is fairly efficient. It kind of brings the 3 under one roof. Where the devil in the details on this initiative is in the procedure, which is rather lengthy. And the change that's occurring here is that, from my perspective, hazing, harassment, and bullying are all treated the same under the procedure, where previously harassment was a more significant event. It was a violation of a student's civil rights, so therefore it had greater due process protections and so forth. But now essentially administrators, when they're doing an investigation, start off treating all 3 the same from a due process standpoint. And then there's some forks in the road later on. But
when you say procedures, I didn't see accompanying procedures with this.
That's correct. The policy committee, and this is an unusual policy initiative from the state. And not only are they prescribing mandatory policy, they're also prescribing mandatory procedures. But we separate procedure from policy. It's an administrative function. The policy committee vets that. So anytime we have a policy that references procedures, the policy, I, under my authority, can put those out immediately, but we run them through the committee. So there's some connection. But the often case, as we meet, the principals and I meet monthly, it's important, and often the procedural initiatives come from the principals who need some clarity on how to act. It helps them to have a process in place. We felt it was important to get the procedure actually out there immediately. It's on our website. So we've actually implemented the procedure prior to the board's adopting the policy.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we had to get going on this whole initiative.
Okay.
It just takes us so long as a group of districts to get a new
Okay.
policy adopted. We didn't want to wait
The
and be out of
procedure's on
compliance.
the Dorset School Board
Okay,
website.
I didn't see that.
It's on the
Okay.
DRC site as well.
What
So-
I found problematic with this is that I was confused as to whom it applied. It seemed like it was mostly for students, but it also, since it's talking about harassment, I didn't understand why it didn't mention teachers or people instead of just students.
You have
Because anybody could be, a teacher could be bullying a student.
You have
We're
a
not
separate
addressing that.
policy for protection of, or prevention of harassment of adults,
Okay.
employees. There's a separate policy on that.
So where it
Students are-
says in the opening paragraph, it talks about harassment of students based on race, color, religion, creed, national origin, marital, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. It doesn't mention age, being younger than other people or older. And I mean, there are all kinds of, and I thought if a teacher was harassing a student, then that age should be in there.
Yeah.
But that's a different thing, right?
Yeah, these are all protected classes. I don't think age really ever comes into play with students. We very well might find age
The little
under
kids
the-
don't get beat up on by the big kids?
Yeah, not in terms of federal age discrimination,
Oh,
you know, as a protected status.
Okay.
One word that I found interesting, and I imagine this has precedence somewhere else, is bullying is something that is repeated over time, and I was just kind of surprised that that popped out first. I don't understand why you can't have one incident of bullying. But I also found some comfort back in the opening that even if conduct doesn't rise to this level, that there still could be discipline
Yeah.
under the
And we-
school's code of conduct. But I'm surprised that
Yeah.
bullying needs to be repeated over time.
Yeah,
And
bullying is like harassment used to be, is I want to say a popular term that floats around in the media and talk shows and so forth. So that wasn't a fair comment, but it's late. I'll make it. When the first bullying policy came out, we used to be your MP 27. It was really helpful for us in administration to have a clinical definition of bullying. So this issue of it being repeated just because something happened once doesn't necessarily, my son's being bullied. Well, let's unpack that a little bit, because there's a lot of behaviors that kids do to one another that don't necessarily rise to what the criteria was meant to by bullying. So that same language has been brought over here. That's really not new for us in terms of.
But I think it's, this process is, this sets into, there's a chain of actions that must be taken when this, so if you had something
That's right.
like bullying, the importance here is it's not as if it's okay to do one bullying incident.
Right.
It's just, once it becomes repeated, that's where you get the procedures and going through the process and, all that.
Yeah.
So, one of the, in looking at this, just to give you my perspective when we were, discussing it, was, it's a very formal process that's set into place. And, and it's, a bit cumbersome on the principles and stuff like that. But, so to some extent, the question is, okay, where do you measure it? You deal with it as a regular disciplinary matter versus, starting to go into the more formal legalistic process. That's,
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know that there's a
burdensome.
right answer as to.
But, on the other hand, we have a lot of this to deal with in our society, and if it's in our society, we deal with it in the schoolhouse, so that's the bottom line. So I think from a policy, my 2 cents is it's convenient to have 3 policies wrapped into one, and they've put basically the same definitions, like bullying definitions that were previous. Nothing's really changed in that regard. The significant innovation here, I would say firstly, is it elevates hazing to the same status as what the other two are kind of neck and neck in terms of due process. Hazing is now on the same plane. And then procedurally, it creates a real extensive procedural process that starts off at a place where you assume it doesn't matter if it's hazing, bullying, harassment. You start with a level of due process and investigation that's the same, and then the procedures fork off from there depending on what you find. So,
think there's a plus and a minus. The procedure is, it's more cumbersome, but at the same time, it's kind of nice to have one process that
Right.
covers everything. So it isn't any longer, because one of the things that I hadn't thought about at all that came out of our discussions was the difficulty of defining whether it is hazing or harassment or bullying. The need to address that in the first place. I'd never really thought of it not being obvious, and it clearly isn't obvious.
No, we go through a lot of training to do that.
So having it was a different process if it's hazing versus harassment, then, first you have to figure out which one it fits into, and are you going to be colored on that based on, what the process is?
So tonight, would you be considering as approving the policy, and then if you approve it as presented, then we would warn it for your adoption, it would come back for second vote.
Okay, so do we have a motion to approve?
Make a motion.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of approving the motion as written, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Let me just ask with,
Motion's carried.
since I'm our rep on the policy and procedures committee and all, is there, do you want me to, should I do things differently than this? I knew this was coming to you guys. I don't know whether, I should do anything different as far as informing you or anything.
No.
Okay, you've got part B.
Okay, so next item is, for your information, a description of the school district merger process. Back when I formulated this agenda item, and I sent this out to all the districts, you're the district that meets at the end of the month. Here we are at the end of the month. So I wrote this, 4 or 5 weeks ago, maybe. So at the time, where folks were with learning about Act 46, this became a piece of information I thought you all needed to have, at your fingertips, because this is essentially the issue before you as to whether or not to enter into a formal merger study committee with some of your neighbors. So my introduction's a little dated, I think, but the content is not. As you heard tonight, came up pretty quickly. So, as I said earlier tonight, the merger study committee process is a formal process under the law. It creates an entity that's subject to the open meeting law. So if you think about it, you're creating essentially like a school board among, you have this power under the law to create this thing. This thing is subject to open meeting law, and it's how it's constructed is within your power. With the other districts, giving it a budget's within your power, as long as, if you think about, as long as it's not over 25,000, then you don't need to go to voters. So you basically have the authority to create this entity that acts like a school board for a temporary period of time. It has a very specific and discrete mission under the law. This law goes back to the 1960s. It's not new law. Act 46 does not create a new process for merging districts. So we call this 706. You'll hear that go around a lot. 706 refers to the section of Title 16 that talks about union school districts. So what I've included you is sort of the guts of that section of the law. Basically, the first part that you got to have 2 or more districts to form, and there's a mechanism right up front that can compel you to do this. So one of the things that was anticipated back at its origin is that boards might not be interested in doing this when the community might be interested in doing this. So there's a mechanism by which the voters can put a petition together to compel you to act. You have to meet with your superintendent. We have to establish a budget, and we have to fix the number of persons, the size that's on the study committee. So that's something you would do jointly as a group of boards that are involved in it. And from there, the study committee representative, the composition of the study committee is done proportional to the number of equalized pupils among each district that's there. So if your Dorset School District have 30% equalized pupil among the merged districts, proposed merged districts, and you'd have 30% of the representatives on the study committee. So your control initially is over the size of the study committee, and to answer that question is, well, what's the relative proportion among who's going to join it? So we have to know all those things before we can answer the question, how big should it be? But that's one of the questions that sort of gets answered right up front.
Dan, just, you know, from process standpoint, or
Yeah.
process, you're talking about, you know, the three boards getting together to decide to do this. Is it typically you get together to decide to do it, and then it's it's a separate meeting that you actually figure out
Yeah,
the details?
that's
or-
very common. I think
I would
in
think
our,
it'd be kind of hard in that first meeting to
Yeah,
actually set the
yeah.
details too.
I mean, it depends on, you know, where we are right now. Let's just say, just back up. I think this question is before you as a board, to what extent do you want to do this or not? What I thought I would do, you're the last board of our big three, I call them, that's had a community engagement issue on this
We should
issue.
stop calling it a big three.
Yeah, the big three. Yeah, I can't help it.
Other
though. It's
people
so,
don't like that.
so attractive in history. I think of, you know, all the successful big threes that are, no, anyway. The,
Are we Ford, or Chrysler, or General
No.
Motors?
So, what I thought I'd do is just poll the school board chairs of these boards to see if they're interested in doing this, and if so, would you like to do it as a function of a joint school board meeting? You know, calling the boards together into a single room and deliberating on this issue together and separately on the issue. It certainly can be done separately as well, and then maybe we'll be doing some of both. The question, as I say in my intro, is, you know, I think my analysis is still the same, and Act 46, that the three K-8 districts, Dorset, Manchester, and Floodbrook, Mountain Towns Red, are going to be required to merge no matter which path you go down. So it makes sense to me that you get going on that process. Once again, you have a lot of questions that need to be answered on behalf of your communities. I don't think we can really take this engagement process any farther. We need to get into that formal structure and do a much broader and thoughtful study and engagement process. Not to say you can't still do your local ones, but we need to do that. And then to what extent Sunderland and Mount Tabor and Davie would be interested in joining that, it would be my hope that you would invite them to join you, because I think they're close to having the same enrollment option as you. So that to me is still an open question. I don't think, I did talk with Winhall the other day. Their position right now is they don't want to change their enrollment option at all. So I doubt it would be worth sending them an invitation. I don't think they necessarily would appreciate.
So they need to have their own study committee to
That's
create
correct.
their own district, even if they could be under a supervisory union with us?
That's correct. And the other factor is Pollitt and Rupert, who designate New York high schools, and like Wells. Now, Wells is in a different supervisory union. We did meet with Wells. So Pollitt and Rupert have a series of community engagement processes coming up later in this month. They're still struggling with this issue and probably will for some time over whether or not they should keep designation. So they're not really necessarily in a position to join a study committee at this moment, you know, with you anyway. So,
But now, you know, Sunderland and Courier, you know, or, you know, Sunderland, Danby, Mount Tabor, if they were to decide to join our study committee, that's no obligation on the part. They could still end up saying, oh, we actually want
Right.
to join together or
Right.
something.
yeah, I think the trick, you know, based on the construct of this first paragraph under 706 is it's better off to be at the table initially and leave later than not being at the table initially and trying to join later. Because you end up into issues of representation and budget that are really hard to figure out later on if time has passed and you haven't had input into some of the front part of it. So you need to kind of, my message to them will be, get a seat at the table, quit later on if you have to, but, you know, start off that way.
But aren't some of those districts looking at us to make the decision first on whether we're going into the supervisory district?
No, I don't.
Or-
No, that was sort of an
okay.
awkward moment when we had that one meeting. Everyone was saying, "No, you go first. You go first."
Well,
I
do we
think they
have to
are.
have that decided before this study committee begins, or under question 13 or
Yeah.
any other area? Is there enough flexibility, or is that not even in the cards within the study committee?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's not really in the cards.
Okay.
Technically, under this is
Right, because
706.
this is just the merger of,
The
let's say,
district.
3 districts,
Very
right?
good. Oh, here we go. So,
But I'm confused again, you know, do we need to answer that question first?
right. Yeah, I don't think so. I think my recommendation is that with this group of districts, since it represents over half the kids in the district, and you know it's fairly impossible for us to do a supervisory district accelerated option.
Yeah.
Okay? So that aspect of a supervisory district isn't really on the table. There is an open question as to whether a supervisory district would be available later on. But I think you start off with a, it's sort of, I call the null hypothesis in education research. You start off with a hypothesis and maybe you disprove it later on. So I would start off with the most likely one is that you're going to form a merged district underneath an an alternative governance option, and then see how it plays out. But you're right. The merger committee itself doesn't really control, the supervisory union construction.
Okay, but aren't there
So
elements?
we too can always back out. It's
That's
not
right.
like we go in here, we're betrothed, we can still break the engagement.
Yeah.
But aren't there going to be elements specifically in the financial section about, what the merged districts are going to look like depending on whether they're going to
That's
stay in a
correct.
supervisory
That's
union?
correct.
But again, so that doesn't have to be in this analysis.
Yeah, this part of it, we will attend to all those things as we're doing it, because it's common sense. In Act 46, we have the option under Act 46 to determine our destiny. So my experience working with the state board on these issues, both with the Red, Arlington, and a bunch of other issues, is that we need to do this ourselves. So we need to figure out locally what makes the most sense. We're not going to let it go to chance that if the districts decide we need an alternative governance structure is the best way to do this, we're going to figure that out as part of the process. We need to build a complete financial model. We need to have our neighbors engaged who might be the likely, this is my big fear, that we're going to do an alternative governance structure, and then later on the dust settles and the state board assigns 6 more districts to us, which the state board has the authority to do. I just assume talk to everyone now and say, we're forming an alternative governance structure. Once every other week, I'll call you up and give you an update. We're forming an alternative governance structure, But I'd rather have my arms around all the parts so we can bring it to a complete model without having, it be disrupted 5 years from now, both financial and educational, that we need to come to a certain scale as an SU and decide, all those things need to be figured out. So the merger study committee, yes, but this is something we're going to work on completely as a process. So that's the introduction part of it. You can see the rest of the 706A talks about the questions, this thing, what is the merger study? It's actually not a long document. Typically in the past, this process of merging was about building a new school. So back in the 60s when this came into being, the idea, particularly at union high schools, you'll see them around the state, the idea was that people wanted to build a new high school, and the state gave a lot of incentives, big money, to build a high school and do that. So typically, this process, 706 process, was divided into 2 parts, what was called Phase 1 and Phase 2. So there's templates out there about how to do this. We did a Phase 1. I sent you that today, just coincidentally. We are not building new schools here, so this law built in the 60s doesn't necessarily line up a whole lot to what we're doing now. But this is the template we will follow nonetheless to do this. And you can see number 13 I alluded to tonight. Any other matters the committee considered? So this is a place where you can address other things. But then I added on this section, it's on packet page 12. The Act 46 does amend 706 a bit. Not significantly, but it's important to remember that there's additional criteria that the study committee has to resolve and answer to. And once again, those are the policy requirements as I had up on the screen there. So in addition to the 706 questions, the study committee also has to answer to the satisfaction of the state board how this governance structure, how the merged union district will meet the policy criteria set out in Act 46. Okay? But other than that, it's not a significant, lengthy report, And there's examples I can share with you what other districts have done.
Who's actually responsible? I'm just thinking nuts and bolts of how this actually works. Who's responsible for writing the prose? Is that the committee itself?
Sometimes it's a committee member who does the drafting for the committee.
And then resources in terms of research, data, finance, is that coming from the state? Are you guys staffing to help to staff
We're going to
that
be
committee?
the back end for a lot of that work, except for some of the real legal work. I anticipate sending that out.
Okay.
So budgetary wise, when we talk about $25,000, a lot of times that is consumed by a facilitator. I don't think we're going to need that. We have better access to our data than the state does, so we'll be able to staff any modeling financially or otherwise. Where we will need help is legal help to look at some of there's some nuances that need to be addressed.
There is some money available.
There's a grant we will tap into as soon as the committee's formed. We'll apply for that. So there's not really, we won't be spending a lot of local money on doing this. There's a grant that's available.
I just think we should be really clear about exactly what resources are available as we're recruiting committee members,
Right.
because
Well,
I think people will be put off if they think that they're going to be responsible for a lot of that
Do
research.
you think it's, at all useful to have the entity that, Nikki South and the School Board Association has set up something to provide?
Not at this point.
Not gonna
No,
be
I mean,
useful?
we are better resourced than they are. We really are. I think, I will reach out to her for informal legal advice. She is not necessarily a municipal attorney herself, so we have better, when I need something really technically answered to my satisfaction, we have other resources available to do that. But
Stitzel or?
Stitzel's a very good municipal lawyer. We have some other things that are more real estate oriented that I would use local resources on, and we do.
Yeah, that's one thing you guys all have to really, since I went around to a bunch of different school board meetings, there are a lot of little funky, strange things out there, assets and liabilities and income streams, and because there's, forest revenues to, small school grants that could get turned into something different,
And the state doesn't know any of those nuances. That's the point. We know those
Big
nuances.
piles of cash sitting out there a couple of places.
Dan, there was a question tonight, and I don't think, I'm not sure how the question was proposed. I don't know if we got the right answer. Can you clarify the final report and the district that's being advised on? Is that final report going to be voted on? Does it
Yes.
come back to this committee? Because I think there was some question on that tonight.
Yeah, I think
about what really happened
Yeah,
at that point.
the process is that you as a school board, you're not in control of the study committee once it gets constituted. You have at least one representative on it. Each district has to have at least one representative on it. So there's definitely a board connection to the process, but you don't have authority over that process.
Right.
The process has its own legal authority. It has a mission, which essentially is a binary mission, yes or no. Yes, merge, or no. If yes, then you must fill out the report and answer the questions. The questions are designed to inform the voters who have the final vote. So essentially, you fill out this template of answers, and that the study committee does, and it gets sent to the State Board of Education. The State Board of Education then has within its authority to reject it or force you to redo question number 4, or anything that's illegal they could expose and say that's illegal, you can't do that. But once the State Board approves it, it comes back for voter approval. It doesn't get subjected, it doesn't go back to local boards. I mean, you can weigh in on it, you can certainly give your opinion as a local board. I thought that's the comment that I heard tonight.
Yeah,
was
and
the local
I'm not
board-
sure that everybody in the room was clear on that, because I
Yeah.
wasn't,
Yeah.
on what happened at that point.
Yeah, so the state board, once they approve it, then it comes back, the study committee has the authority to warn that for a vote, It gets warned for a vote.
What
in each-
exactly does get, this is all public,
Yep.
so all the information's available publicly, but what is the question that's posed to, and I assume it's the same question in all the districts?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. It gets voted on by Australian
How
ballot.
simple is that question? Do you want to
It's long, it's a page long.
Okay.
And it gets voted on the exact same day, every single district, by the same methodology. So that's what the law requires.
So it is a long description.
Yeah, and I can give you examples of those. When we did the red recently, that's
Right.
essentially the bylaws are the question that get warned before. The voters have enough information to make sense of it.
Okay.
So, I just wanted to provide the information to you tonight. I know you still have lots of questions, but I think the question before you in the coming weeks, if not months, will be whether to embark on this process, which will be a momentous occasion for our districts. I think from my perspective, we've completed, I think successfully, summer engagement period around Act 46 in terms of, I feel comfortable that you all know the pros and cons of what the law contains. You starting to feel a little bit what your community thinks about it and what their concerns are. So from my perspective, you're fully informed to make this decision to embark on a study. But if you don't feel that way, then you want to take some more time, that's fine too.
How would you characterize where the other, at
Yeah.
least the other district, big
It's
The
hard to
other
say.
candidate
You know,
districts.
when we leave here tonight, you're going to change your minds too. So I think that's sort of the challenge. From my perspective, I think we can continue to have people go back and forth on it depending on what misinformation they read in the newspaper tomorrow, you know? So I think from my end, I think folks have enough information to suggest a further study. If nothing else, the state's going to do it to you, so why not start to study it, you know? But I think the Mountain Towns Red, I would say, has been pretty steadfast in their support of a study process. I'm not sure about Manchester. I think Manchester is still weighing the pros and cons of that. I don't necessarily see consensus among the board or the community.
Definitely saw some folks on the mend, you know, when I went to their
Yeah.
session. There were some people who were raring to go and some people who were definitely not ready to go.
Yeah, so it's hard. I don't know. They haven't really deliberated as a group after that event. Mount Tabor and Danby, you know, if you're familiar with Courier, there's 3 districts involved. There's Mount Tabor and Danby, which are 7 through 12 non-operating districts. They don't have a district at K-6. They have a school district called Union District 23, Courier, in grades K through 6. It's a union district. So when you're talking about merger votes, the Union District Board, which has 7 members, has no vote in this process. The vote goes to the town board. Since the town boards previously gave authority to create the Union District, they have the authority to dissolve it. So the Mount Tabor and Danby boards are the 2 boards that will vote on the merger study committee. At our meeting, we had a joint meeting. The Union District Board spontaneously voted to strongly encourage the other 2 boards to support a merger if you guys were to include them. But I'm not sure how that'll sugar off locally among the local boards.
Is it an option for us to consider something like a K-6 merger and offering choice in 7-8 and
Yes.
looking to those sorts of districts?
Absolutely. That's one of the essential questions the study committee will answer. You know, what is the configuration of the district?
Do we get to 900 with the close?
You don't
ones?
need, the
All
900
kids
standard
count.
really only comes into play with the accelerated
it's-
merger option.
Okay, right, it's the
But you have
SY.
enough, you know, you and Manchester are over 900, you know. Remember, it's K-12, it's not just
Yeah,
your
all
school.
the kids count, not just.
Doesn't the red mandate a higher number, though?
The red standard mandates 1150 or 4 school districts. So you can be under 1150 if you have 4 school districts.
Right.
And you have 4.
Which is what Windhall was looking at doing with non-operating, you know, get 4 of them together so they could form a red, even though, you know, nobody operates a school. So we're looking at, you know, Sandgate,
No, excuse,
Stratton,
you
and
have
then,
more
you
than
know.
1150 between the 3 of you.
yeah.
Right, like the Mountain Towns Red doesn't count individually anymore as districts.
It does.
It's one
It
district.
does, actually.
Oh, it does,
It's a
it backs
unified
up.
union school district. It's one school district. The other districts don't exist anymore.
Right, yeah, I'm saying the same
So
thing.
that's one school district.
That's one school district.
Yeah.
It doesn't back into 4.
No. Yeah, that's a special, that's another little twist. They don't have an electorate anymore.
They had 4 until they did the red, didn't they?
Yes, they had
They
a,
have 1,
that's how
but
they
we
did the red.
we have enough students that the issue of 4 is not.
that's
is
right.
moot.
You meet the 1150
Right.
standard, you have 1300.
I guess
So-
I have the same feelings, Dan. The technical side of bringing these 3 larger districts together, I've kind of seen that for a while. I'm comfortable with your recommendation. Where I'm struggling with is the community's looking to us to answer a lot of questions, yet at the same time, we're pretty much looking at some point to hand all of this over to a study committee that is really going to be then answering those questions and informing the community. And I'm not sure that that connection has been made yet. And so I just...
Well, I think it came out tonight. It was sort of
Do you
it
think-
provoked a reaction tonight.
Yeah.
When it was like,
So-
wait, that's not, I didn't understand a study committee, but, you know,
So I don't think everybody was clear.
probably not everybody's
So,
question. you're
right. So I'm just saying, you know,
You're going to have Dorset representatives on that study committee,
understood.
you know, and just like you have Dorset representatives on this board.
Will they be able
Those-
to report to us?
That's right. I mean, that's
at a board
typically what
meeting?
happens.
It
Those
doesn't have to be an exec
representatives
session, it's
saying,
all on
they don't
record.
have to, but that's, as a community, it's in your interest to make sure that happens. And you'll at least have 1 school board member there. Can't imagine you having less, you know, I assume you're going to have a couple
I
board
thought
members.
I thought you could have like just one school board.
Minimum
member
of
on it.
1.
Oh, okay.
You got to have 1. You can't have less than 1. You can have more than 1.
But
So
you have to have a room for community members too. right?
Yeah, and this is such an important process to the community. Usually it's strategically advantageous to have a lot of community members, you know, as many as possible.
But the problem is that we have we still have, if you pull 3 districts together, you can't have too many people from each of the districts before you start getting to be an unwieldy number.
Well, that's the first question we answer is how big this thing's going to be, and that's going to require the board's meeting and deciding. I'll put some models together for you, assuming you're going to do that. I will suggest here's an unwieldy way of doing it. Here's a lean and mean way. There's probably something in the middle, you know. But we need to know who's at the table before we can answer that question.
If it's equalized students, then we're looking at us at about 300, Mountain Towns 450.
Yep.
Manchester 550.
Yeah.
So where are you going with that? You're trying to figure out
just-
what the configuration might be?
Just thinking about relative representations.
We have to have a non-school board person on it, right?
No, there's a requirement that you have one school board member.
Right,
The other seats are up for grabs.
I see. Okay.
But these are things, once again, I think it would be productive. My approach would bring the boards together and talk about this all together and answer questions. You know, spend a whole meeting talking about, you know, what are the pros and cons, it's going to work, and then see if I can bring you to a vote on that issue.
I have 3 questions.
Sure.
The first one is, it sounds like what you're saying is whatever the study committee comes up with goes straight to the electorate for a vote. It
That's
doesn't
correct.
come here.
That's correct.
And that's not what I shared with everybody.
Yeah, we kind of tried to correct that.
You tried to correct that.
Yeah.
So why is that? I mean,
It's
why?
the way the law is. I mean,
Okay.
so once again, right up front, I mean, this is my interpretation of the law. In 706, it talks about right up front the boards being an obstacle to this process, so the voters have a mechanism to, you know, do that. So I think the idea was, since you're forming a new entity, you know, you're forming a new school district that's going to be a composite board, that entity, the planning committee for that entity, shouldn't be beholden to the current constituent members. It should be representative of the communities involved, but it should be liberated to a certain extent, if you will, or cut free from its originating authority.
Otherwise, it just turns into a board fight.
Well, I don't know, you know, but it's just, you know, like I said, this goes back to the 60s when people were building new schools. I think it was also a question of capacity. Why wouldn't we create this new entity to oversee the new thing? That's not going to be our responsibility anyway. It's going to be their responsibility to run the new school. You know, and that's kind of what we have today. We have
Well,
boards.
the problem I have with it is that if we're the proxy for the people, if people have given
Right.
us the responsibility to understand what our schools are all about and what needs to be done, and we're making a recommendation, we're no longer making that recommendation. And that's why I worded it the way I did, is that it's our responsibility to make sure that whatever the study committee recommends, yeah, maybe we should be a barrier, because if it doesn't fulfill our fiduciary responsibility to the kids, then I feel like we've fallen short. So they're voting on something, and
Well, but
we
that's
might
not
have to come out and say, we don't agree with that.
That's right. I mean, Jim and I were in a session where not Tony Lamb, Chris Leopold basically said he hasn't seen a successful union vote where a school board opposed the study committee's report. You know.
Yeah, so that's
yeah,
why
I mean,
we should be a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, you are closely connected to it, but I just need, you know, as I
Well, I
am a
think,
stickler for
we
the
have
law,
that-
you're not necessarily in control of the process.
I don't want to be in control, but I want to make sure, it just seemed like it made sense
Yeah, this
for
is
us
I've
to be
been
comfortable.
I've been saying to a lot of people out here, once the study committee gets created, we're handing over the keys.
Well, you have
And
been
we got to
saying,
realize that.
but,
That's an important consideration before you vote. You need to be comfortable with that. If
And
you're
not that we can't,
okay,
not that
so
we
we're not
can't
going
have
to change the
significant
law, that's the
influence.
reality.
Yeah,
It's
It's
not
not
that we
just
can't
your
have significant
interpretation of it.
influence.
That is how it works. My job is to make sure you understand that before you vote on it, okay?
Right.
We
Well,
can have
we do have
significant
escape,
influence.
we've got escape hatches
work with
along the
others.
way. We can have significant influence, we'll have reporting.
Yep.
And we can work with others.
Absolute worst case scenario, they can send that to the Australian ballot and we can say, this is not what we
Yeah.
envisioned. We don't support this, and so you have an out there.
Yep, I get it.
But I think the perception at that point is that we just wasted an enormous amount of time and resources.
Exactly.
And here we are starting up again.
But that's the whole idea. The study committee is going to be very incentivized to create something
That'll
that the voters
pass.
will accept.
Well, I can tell from what I was feeling in this room tonight that I don't see a lot of support for any, I can't imagine a scenario you're gonna have a lot of support for. But I guess we have to go through the exercise because we have to go through the exercise.
Well, I don't think
I wouldn't agree with that. 'Cause,
I don't think we've actually talked about, we've alluded to the big three actually coming together, but we have not spent a lot of time in any of our meetings actually talking about that.
Yeah.
No.
And we really don't know. We
Yeah, it's
haven't
hard
tested-
initially as a concept.
Well, and we haven't met again with those board members now that everybody knows what's going on and understands it. It almost seems like a good time to get together again as a group, because that just socially, from conversations I'm having with other people outside of these forums, there's some varied positions among board members on where this should all go, and it would be nice for us to get around a table and have that conversation. I feel like I'm voting in a vacuum, and I'm not feeling
Well, that's-
enormously positive about
I think
that.
that's not surprising. At the same time, I'll tell you, one thing that surprised me in recent times, Dave and I had a meeting with a couple of parents, very intelligent people who did a lot of homework on how this whole law and how this whole process worked, and essentially they had it all wrong. And, they didn't know, they were missing what was actually going to happen and what the process and all this. Because it's really hard to figure it out.
Yeah.
We've been living through this stuff, and I think, we can't expect the community members to be able to make, solid decisions based on understanding the process, because we're just introducing it to them. And I think, until they, I'm not trying to, I don't know what the right answer is or how this is going to come out. And I'm not pushing for any, I have some things that I think make sense, but at the same time, I don't know what's going to get, what direction it's going to go. That's why I keep on saying it's really important for us to understand that once it goes to study committee, we may no longer, it doesn't matter what, some of us think, because it can go in a different direction. I think we have the ability to try to keep it in a logical progression, but I don't think, we can't define what the outcome's going to be.
Do other schools in this, or districts in this group, including reaching out a little bit further than the three, have more to gain than we do? I mean, we kind of we trotted out a dog and pony show tonight that pretty much made the case that this doesn't really accomplish a whole lot for us.
Yeah, and I think that,
will it accomplish a lot for some of
No.
these other or outlying smaller districts that
Not
might?
necessarily. I think, it's pretty much, what I present to you is how I present it to all the others. I'm pretty uniform in that regard because I'm just not a very creative person.
It's called efficient.
Yeah, but, this law doesn't really do much for us.
Yeah.
Okay? In my office, I said we talk about like a hand of cards, like we get a crappy hand,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's really hard to think about where the efficiencies are going to come and so forth. And nevertheless, there are some opportunities, but none of our districts are, chomping at the bit to do this. If they're small and you would think there's benefit from partnering with you, they're often facing a significant tax increase, because their tax rate is very, very, very low. No matter what they do, it's going to jump 30, 40 cents. Some of our districts, as Jim said, have significant assets. Others have debt. They just assume give you a sheriff, So there's a whole bunch of stuff, and all that needs to be
Is there a
settled.
legitimate case when you look at Jim's presentation, for example, that when there is that little section of the law that says if you choose to do nothing, you have to explain why.
Right.
And we can already demonstrate that everything they want to accomplish,
Except for one huge thing.
enhancing educational opportunity.
Statement number one of the principle, sustainable governance structure.
Yep.
We have a totally unsustainable governance structure. We are the poster child for unsustainable governance structure, literally.
We're
Okay?
in the
Secretary's
presentation.
we are it.
Yep.
So we do not have a sustainable governance structure, and you will not be able to demonstrate that, in my opinion, by
And
maintaining what
do you
we
think
have.
that's an equal balance, having a more sustainable governance structure in all these districts, giving up local control? Is that an equal? I mean, how are you going to balance
The
that?
state's saying you don't have to give up local
The people
control.
are most, since there are no
I don't
great
want you going to 10 meetings
efficiencies.
a month. Don't get me wrong. I don't.
No, this-
There aren't necessarily wonderful things to sell. You know, I think we can create some improvements out of the structure, but there aren't wonderful things to sell. What I'm seeing motivating others the most out there is fear of certain things. Fear of, you know, one, no longer being a member of the BRSU or part of the structure of, you know, the economic system we've created. That's definitely, you know, got some school districts significantly concerned. The fact that they could end up, you know, they look at, oh gee, what are our other options, going with other schools in a different direction. It's the other big thing is losing school choice. So, you know, losing school choice and then losing the infrastructure that's been created here. Those are both, because you have, you know, well, thinking of, you know, frankly, it's, you know, Bedouin, Courier, Sunderland, you know, Winhall. It's, you know, I don't think any of them want to leave the structure we have right now. And one of their biggest concerns was when it was like, oh, you three are going to go off and do something and leave us out in the cold.
No, she asked me the question, what's the norm out there?
Oh, what's the norm?
Yeah, it's not.
Because a sustainable governance structure, if that's all we needed, would be very simple. All we have to do is not require you to attend the board meetings.
That's still not going to, that's, once again, you're starting from here, but not from there. From the state's perspective, you have all these individual silos, all these individual school districts. The state can't administer this fragmentation. So the state needs sustainability from an entity.
You go back to, we keep focusing on meetings, but, you know, and the meetings are a little, you know, when I did the September, going to all 12 meetings, and, you know, that's
talked about that.
That's an issue, but also the 12 budgets, the 12, you know, everything, answering questions.
So the next
times.
question is, so we narrow it down to 4 districts, and that's going to be unsustainable too over time. So
It's
another
more
5 years, we merge
sustainable.
again.
It's more sustainable. And, you know, the law, and I saw an article today, or a quote from, forgot who it was, someone representing sort of the state board or the legislature saying, you know, it's, in the 2019 scenario that's in Act 46, it really doesn't say what the state board can and cannot do in terms of bringing people together. You know, my interpretation of the law is that the state doesn't have the authority to merge districts against their will. The state has the ability to assign you to supervised unions. That's, you know, the state board has had that authority. That's been their purview since the beginning of time. But they have no mechanism to merge districts together. One of the quotes today was, we're going to merge you, you know, but it's going to be with like enrollment options. So the state, you know, as a mandate right now, doesn't have the ability to merge dissimilar enrollment option districts in 2019. But they're going, if they don't have the authority, they're going to have the authority to merge similar enrollment option districts together. So,
How does it usually work? Would board meetings kind of float from one school to the next to kind of enhance community engagement, or would there be, I mean, how do these things work?
Well, I think usually there's still school committees. You know, that's when you have boards at a higher elevation, you have some sort of mechanism locally that works with the principal. Doesn't have policy-making authority, but has the ability to advise the principal, take the pulse of the community, parents, that kind of thing.
But when you just said about similar board options and they have to align according to that, that doesn't address the question of someday, well, maybe it's too far away. Maybe the 4 meetings the next superintendent can live with for an indefinite period of time.
You know, I wouldn't view it as meetings per se. I mean, just personally, I know what I'm getting into when I took this job. You know, I enjoy the work. You know, I don't complain about it too much, I hope. But this issue of sustainability from the state's perspective is a very real one. You know, we don't have entities of scale that can be held accountable from the state's perspective. We have I think it's over a third of our schools are under a size of 100. When we do state assessment data, we have many schools that have their data suppressed because it's too small to do any inferential statistics with it. So one of the things the state has done, kind of a little tweak, but an important tweak in Act 46, it makes the SUs the LEA for accountability. So when it comes time to look at test results, the supervisory union will be held accountable for ensuring its schools are doing well. So they'll be able to aggregate that data up to a point where it suddenly can be looked at, you know?
And
So that's
happen,
important.
whatever you do, merger-wise.
Yep, that's right. So from the state's perspective, I guarantee you this is an unsustainable structure. I mean,
But is the 4 thing a sustainable structure?
I think, you know, once again, the state anticipates the alternative governance structure being an approach that's necessary in many regions. I think we qualify for an alternative governance structure, no problem. I think the state would view that, my perception, this is why it's so important to stay in dialogue with them. You know, when I've checked in with them since June when we went there, I talked to Stephen Morse again the other day, chair of the state board, you know, well, what are you doing? I said, well, we're working on the alternative. Okay, good. You know, so I think they would respect our decision. This is the best solution for our group of districts. There's no expectation that we would form a supervisory district.
Kind of tied into David's question. There, at one point tonight, I think you said, you know, this is like phase one, and at one table I visited, it was like, well, what's phase two going to be? And I think that's actually a really good thing, good question, and a good thing to be concerned about, and I had no clue how to answer that.
Well, you know, you heard Patty say, Representative Comline, there's two, you know, filling seats, you know, we've heard that argument. So ultimately there's going to be school closure. There's school closures right now in the state. You know, we just had another one closed the
I
other
think the
day.
idea of phase one, you know, phase one gets you guys to merge together. What are they going to make us, you know, what are the puppeteers going to do to us next time?
You know, it's not puppeteers, as you know,
It's the people you actually elect and vote into office.
And they have, you know, we had the highest per pupil cost in
too.
the country, and, you know, the question is, how can we get a handle on that, and do we need to get a handle on it? And
So the answer is we don't know. That depends on how well this works and what it happens.
Well, I mean, you know, when we had that exchange in Manchester with Representative Sharp, you know, I thought the most illuminating exchange was between him and an audience member, and the audience member was questioning whether there's a problem or not, and he was just like, yeah, I can't help you anymore. If you don't think there's a problem there, I don't know what else to tell you. But let me tell you, from the state's perspective, the system's in crisis, okay? I mean, you know, it really is, and, you know, they, you know, anyway.
But I think you know, honestly, I think we're doing a lot better than most of the rest of the places. There are a lot of other places in the state, and so we're a little bit blind to you know, probably to the situation that exists elsewhere.
Yeah, we've sort of achieved, I think, you know, and I was, you know, I said modestly pleased with our ability to work as a system.
And I take umbrage at everyone saying we're the most expensive education system in the country, because are they comparing apples to apples? Are they taking out special ed?
Yes.
They are.
Yes. Yeah.
Because when they say 7 adults to 1 student, they're not taking it out.
No, when we
they're
just look,
blurring paraprofessionals.
when
and
we
all
look
that.
at number of adults, any other metric, we come out very, very high, and I think we're still number one. And all those kinds of those questions. Are you talking about teachers? Are you talking about guidance
exactly.
counselors?
And so when he says 7 to 1 or 5 to 1 ratio, which I've heard, they're
the
including
ratio issue.
paraprofessionals, they're including all these other things that are really usually 90% of the time related to special ed.
We can see that. We can see that data at the plate. You know, that neutralizes data point. It still works out. We have a lot of adults per kids because we have a lot of small schools.
Well, I've never seen the data all cleanly. I always see blurred data without any clear. It's usually apples to oranges.
That current reality.
I'd love to see apples to apples.
That current reality slideshow we do that you don't like a whole lot. You know, the one with
Which one?
Rebecca Holcomb does, and we have our data in there from the School Board Association. It's got those
Right,
data.
but
in
you've heard my criticisms of why that doesn't make sense.
I'm critical of it as well, but it is what it is.
So I don't see that anyway.
Yeah.
So I had one question which took us 20 minutes. The other 2 questions were, it's pretty clear that people want to have an understanding of what it takes or what would be the elements around privatizing the school.
Right.
And that doesn't seem to be something that's going to come up in the study commission.
Yeah, I think.
I need to understand that, because I think that's actually easy to answer, because we wouldn't have access to the supervisory union, right?
Right.
We would have to provide all the other supports and.
Yeah, I think we can. It's hard for me to do that analysis for you, not because I have an ethical problem with it. We don't have the time to do it. I can tell you just from a back of the napkin. We did go down, the Manchester board and I took a little field trip last year or the year before, I forget now, down to North Bennington School, and I sort of watched that process at a distance to a certain extent. But a couple key points financially that I took away from talking with the headmaster. One, 2 important issues allowed them to create a viable model. One was, and they're both related to the teachers, you know, because they have the same teaching staff in the building. The teachers agreed to take a significantly lower quality health insurance plan. And secondly, the teachers agreed to give up their state pensions. okay? So, and they're not doing well right now, okay? They have a very high tax rate down there. And that's not just a function of them having, you know, the other parts of their district, but the tax rate in that district is very high. There's been some other challenges. Recently, they found out they sort of kicked themselves out of the community eligibility program for hot lunch because they're no longer affiliated with the SU's numbers. But there might be pros and cons to that. I think, you know, that's something, if you're interested in doing, you'd probably have to someone study that for you. I would just be cautious about hiring some of the folks who are advocates for that model, who I would question some of their numbers. I've heard some of the other schools thrown around as models, and some of them I have insight into, and I could tell you it's a house of cards in terms of some of the financial. So
It's tough, you know, people, when I've heard that presented, I think it'd be nice to see the numbers and all, but at the same time, people keep on presenting it as, why don't we just go private, then we'll have a total control and we'll save a ton of money.
Yeah,
And I'm like, you know, people keep making that blanket statement, and I honestly think it would be an administrative nightmare to try to, you know, recreate everything we have to do. It has real advantages too. But
So whether you do it or not, we're gonna have to get some information
yes,
about that.
to answer your question, that, you know, to a certain extent, the merger study committee could provide some analysis that would inform that, but I don't see that being a major, you know, function of their approach. They're going to be talking about merging the district, not necessarily closing a school like that and privatizing. I mean, they could do a model closing the school. That's one of the questions they have to answer: is there going to be a school here or not? Okay, so from their assumption, they could say Dorset will not operate a school. You know, our new district will not include the Dorset School. So we will include in our financial model the cost of the tuition for those students, you know? But in order to determine is that a good idea or not for you, that's something you're gonna have to do on the side, you know? But the model for them will include school choice financial model, you know?
Right, because it doesn't, what happens to the physical structure of this school doesn't change the aspect of still having to merge or have a district of 900 students, correct?
Yeah, you're still gonna have a school district.
Right.
This board, I mean, this is the challenge when you, North Bennington's still in the paper.
300 students.
They refer to their school as it's their school, and it's not their school anymore. It's an independent school run by a separate board. So the school district still exists. You become a non-operating district. You could then merge with Winhall.
But we'd still have to be part of a broader
You
district.
still
That's
have
my
to be
point.
part of a supervisory.
That doesn't eliminate the Act 46.
That's right.
Fundamental issue is
So
we have to be part
the
of a
school
bigger
district-
district.
Right, but we would merge with Winhall.
You would merge with Winhall.
North Bennington.
North Bennington can't merge with us in spite of what they want, because part of their town is part of the Mount Anthony Union School District.
Oh.
The Mount Anthony Union School District would have to let them go. They're not gonna let them go, I would predict.
More problems than you're solving.
Yeah.
So you would merge.
We're gonna have, be able to answer the question, because it's gonna come up, because
Yeah.
it seems like an easy answer, but it's not.
Right.
So
Nothing's an
we have
easy
to come up
answer,
with
I
that.
don't-
And the third thing is study group consultant. You make it sound like we're not gonna need to hire a consultant for that.
Not a facilitator per se. I mean, a lot of times they're hiring a facilitator. I think we can do that. I can do a chunk of that. Financially, I'm very confident we're not going to need an outsider to do that. I've done the study essentially for the Red leaving their SU and impact, and we've done those studies ourselves. I've worked with the state on that. They always take my numbers and put their cover paper on it, so we can do that faster and more effectively and more responsive to your needs. We might, on the other hand, if we find a need where we're going to need some of that analysis, I wouldn't hesitate to farm it out. We're going to need, particularly at some point, if we get into cross-SU boundary kind of stuff, if we're talking about bringing some other district into the mix, then we're going to have to probably involve some other outsider to do that.
We have, the reason I asked is we have somebody in the town of Dorset who is highly skilled in this area, and this is what he does.
Yeah.
And he's volunteered to be helpful, so maybe
Has he
we
merged
should.
school districts?
I think so. I think he's done all kinds of analysis and demographics and stuff. He manages Manhattan. He manages a lot of New Jersey. Does a lot of their demographic analysis.
But that isn't going to be a huge part of this. I mean, this is pretty idiosyncratic to
I'm
what we're
wondering
doing.
about, okay.
Yeah. But if we needed that,
I'm thinking of trying to get him to be one of the members of this study committee.
it'd be great to have that expertise on the
Yeah,
committee.
that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
He lives and breathes a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. But it's, from my standpoint, again, if I were to go to another district and offer my services, I would be hired in a second as a consultant to do this for them.
Right.
Okay?
Right. I
I've
understand
had
what you're
several
saying.
offers to go do that, so it's interesting to me in my own district where,
No.
it's always, I'm just
No,
saying,
No, I'm just saying we have other
Yeah.
resources in addition to you.
it's
but-
not my ego, it's saying to you, we're gonna ultimately bear the brunt of responding to an
Right.
outsider trying to understand our
course.
system. And
Okay.
that's gonna be a drag on the system, is to, answer questions that we can answer more effectively ourselves. And we have board members who are smart enough, and, we'll have community members who are smart enough to process this as well. We're loaded with capacity as an ecosystem in that regard.
We are.
Where we're going to need some help on the specific legal things that we're going to encounter. We have some parts. We have lots of parts of things that are going to have to come together. I don't feel comfortable doing myself.
So unless there are any other questions, what do you need from us?
Nothing. I mean, my recommendation would be that at this point you don't take action this evening. I don't think you're ready to take action on this, but this is the question I would argue is coming before you. What I would prefer to do is work with David as your chair to just take the temperature on the other boards and see how comfortable they are, and I will work to facilitate a conversation to see what that looks like, to see if we're ready, if we're not ready. If that sounds okay to you, I will endeavor to do that. I think that's probably the most effective way to do it at this point.
If we come back after that conversation, say in November, and do elect to start or approve a study committee, what do you think the timeline's going to look like? A year?
Well,
6 months?
Yeah, I think we don't have that much work in front of us, but I don't want to bring anything to the voters until after the gubernatorial election. I think it would be imprudent. There's no need for us to go faster with the incentives. I think it would be wise for us to watch the legislative session this winter. I think it would be wise to watch the gubernatorial race unfold and see how Act 46 weathers the storm. But I don't want to wait until all that's over before starting. So I just soon start working on it, enter into that next phase of community engagement, start putting some meat on the bones in terms of some of the models, and just watch and be vigilant, and also stay connected to our neighbors, and what they're going to do, because our neighbors are already, I've had a couple queries. I mean, lately, I can't predict it, and suddenly the phone ringing from one of our neighbors saying, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? What are you doing? And I'm like, well, nothing yet. But so I think, fortunately, I think we're in a pretty good place to watch that go forward. But I also think it's important. My perspective is there's nothing more for me to do to lead you to bring to a point. I think you have enough information, the issues. I mean,
agree.
I feel totally comfortable, you take all the time you want to deliberate on it, but there's nothing more for me to do, I think, in terms of, other than trying to facilitate groups.
Consensus? I mean,
I want to know more. I want to take the temperature of these other boards first and just see who the players are going to be. You might be surprised about who's not going to be a player. So before we go leaping forward with an assumption it's going to be a certain 3, let's just have that conversation. That would be my request. But if the rest of you are ready to go forward,
No,
then
I was just wondering, is there room for that to happen at a BRSU meeting, or is that not the appropriate place?
Yeah.
Or do you have a separate meeting? I don't feel the need that Dorset School Board needs to call another meeting, but I think we need to have more community engagement, probably at our next meeting, if that's possible. It's right before Thanksgiving. So again, I'm not sure what venue that's going to happen in.
Community engagement, you mean another session like this?
No, having
I don't
regular
think,
school board meetings,
yeah, with
people can
a
attend.
follow-up to this, yeah.
They've pretty much said, they gave us carte blanche.
I'm still not clear, and that we communicated all of this properly.
Yeah, and I also think that once
Or
people
clearly.
leave, in my experience with patients, for example, you do a lot of talking and they retain about 10%, and then they have all these other questions, and that's a fresh bit of information out there, and I think the rule applies that we'll probably be getting a lot of follow-up in the next couple
But just
weeks.
back to the point of, is it going to be 3 or more districts?
Yeah.
Can that happen at a BRSU meeting? I don't even know when the next one is.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that's not the right forum, just
Okay.
because there's going to be other people there, other districts there that aren't really part of the question. I think they'd appreciate knowing, but I think at some point, I've got to figure out a way to organize that group of people, whoever they're going to be. My inclination would be to start with the chairs at some point and say, maybe we have a meeting with the chairs and get together and we can share, where they think their boards, how much more deliberation their boards are going to need. But I think symbolically, I think it would be important to bring you, if you're ready to vote on it affirmatively, to bring you all together in the room and have you do that in front of each other, because you're embarking together on a journey. I wouldn't want to do that not knowing what people are going to do or having a straw poll of how they do it. And
So that would happen certainly after the next set of board meetings, probably.
I don't know, it could happen next week if David's so inclined to do it and the other chairs are ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, if we know who the players are, I just want to know who our dance partners are as we move forward.
Mountain
I don't
Towns
want
Red
to.
has been, they're impatient with the rest of us right now.
I understood
So
that
there's
even from the last meeting.
I'm
I
just
felt
saying
that
from
way.
the standpoint of knowing that they're in.
Yeah, there's no
they've
urgency.
been in for a while.
I think
Manchester's a lot harder to call.
Manchester has their regular monthly meeting next week. But anyway, back to answer David, my inclination would be to work through the chairs and have the chairs just keep the pulse on their folks, and then if
Well,
they
I'm
need.
asking for a pulse, and I'm getting a mixed, it's a very erratic.
Well, that will evolve, so I'll just keep checking in with them, and I'll try to bring the others in, and maybe we'll come up with some sort of educational forum, where we have dinner together and I do a slideshow presentation on the merger process and we ask questions. I don't know, whatever.
It feels like everyone is pretty clear that the big three kind of have to sometime get together. If this consolidation process doesn't get stopped by something else, that's the direction it's going in.
That's my objective analysis is that that's how it looks right now. I don't see any other scenario where you would be allowed to exist independently.
And so
entering into
I
this-
don't have a sense of whether you all agree with that or not.
I agree with that. I just am not certain that even the people who are in the room tonight see that clearly, or the fact that once the study committee goes forward, it's out of our hands.
Right.
And then
That part
it's
is
going to be
definitely
voted on, and I'm just saying, I think we need to cross that barrier before we vote.
I don't have a problem with that.
I also
mean,
think
no,
starting
not
to
that. If we do a study committee and it comes up with something, then I definitely think we need to call people together again to give them an idea of what it is they're voting on and whether we agree with it or not.
We could also potentially
People need to
have
be briefed
three
on it.
merge with three other partners that are much smaller. Why do we have to go big? Why do we have to be this big monolithic three giant school
'Cause it's
that is
K-8.
giant? However, we have other choices as well to
If
explore.
we decided to go to K to 6,
If we decided to go to K6, we have other choices.
to join with
be
other
bigger.
people, I think that would
You
be
think
a
it'll be
very.
even bigger?
Yeah.
Sunderland, Courier,
Yeah,
us.
because you have to get down, if it's an alternative, if you want to go preferred, you're going to have one board with more districts. If you have an alternative,
Right, 'cause you've
you're
got
going to
the
have a
two
couple
towns.
districts, but you're still looking at bigger.
This is where we started several months ago. Should we have a pros and cons for each one of these options that we have out on the table? Even though we seem to be going towards the big three, I don't know if we vetted all these other things, and I don't know if the public understands whether we vetted these issues or not. Each option. Is that too extensive?
No, I mean, Sunderland did exactly that as a board. They went through an exercise of sort of pro and cons. I think they have more options than you, honestly. I think under the law, I don't see a whole lot of option for you other than the option of changing your fundamental configuration first. If you wanted to go non-operating or go to K6, that's different. But if you stay K8, 9, 12, there's really only one option available to you under the law.
I think the idea of changing our operating structure, it's not something you can just throw around and like, whoa, go K6, or if we go, not operating. It's, you have to be honest about what is the probability of anything like that, actually happening.
It's also going to be more expensive.
To have
What is
choice
going to be,
for
to
middle
become
school.
smaller?
No, to not, once again, filling seats capacity. The more kids you put under one roof and one governance entity, the lower the tax rate.
But
So
we're the only ones with a middle school.
Manchester and Fledbrook all have middle schools.
But if you're not merged with them, then you lose students to private schools more so than you would.
Well, you potentially could, but maybe not. But, so who would you, if you were K6, and they assumed they would go.
Long term.
If you said you went K6, but they stayed K8s,
No, well, if we went K6, they stayed K8s, and we merged with other K6s.
so you'd have to probably
They would
merge
have
with
to
Sunderland and Mount Tabor and Danby.
That's 4.
That's four, that's the red.
And that creates about 500 students.
Yeah, but you'd have 4, so you'd have a red.
Yep. But it,
So when we do the math of that, we'd say.
I know there's an infinite number of combinations we can come up with.
Yeah.
Well, not really. We have 2 choices unless we go K-12 choice, which I don't think is really a viable option.
So you'd look at the cost. I mean, the cost still would be more expensive because we apply the union high school tuition rate to those 7 and 8 graders versus the Dorset rate that you're currently
So you
paying.
think, just thinking of people's comments tonight, do you think the idea of going K-6 and, choice 7, 8 is going to be,
I'm
putting
thinking about
operating
people
7, 8,
saying the word small 500 times.
are not operating 7, 8 anymore?
Well, they were talking about small schools. They
Small
weren't necessarily
schools, we have
talking
more in
small school
common
board.
with those small schools than say we do with the schools that are twice our size. I'm just trying to throw things out there that we haven't discussed yet, so.
No, it's fine.
What we aren't taking into account is that Dorset has the least amount of issues of many schools. We don't have debt, as you are observing. We don't rely on a small school grant like Danby does. We don't have huge resources from the, from,
Yeah, they both have them.
Okay, well, and we don't get resource from the government for having forestry that we would lose. So for us to merge on a governance perspective, the cleanest thing is to keep the K through 8 and to be part of the other 3 that are K through 8. We have one of the easiest issues, and that's why, and we've been living with this since June and hearing all the discussions and stuff. And so one part of me is wondering, well, are they struggling with it just because they haven't been living with it as long and they haven't heard all the other things? And you're right to say, well, and they haven't heard it either. So the process of bringing everybody along to the same place is a really difficult one, and it's hard to invite everybody to the meeting. So you either trust us, or we go through this, and I got to find the right balance. And I'm not as impatient about it as I sound, but it is something that we have struggled with, and I do like the idea of throwing out a K through 6, but I'm not sure. I think that's even more work to make that happen.
Well,
and
I
it's
think that you
more
say
costly.
they do trust us because they know that we do our homework. And when you have a multi-million-dollar budget you put before the town 2 years in a row, nobody even asks a question.
Right.
That's representative of that trust. And I think we have an obligation to continue to earn that trust. I think we started it tonight. I think we do have to bring people along more. I think a lot of people are still in shock. You think that there is a lot out there of information, but I'm always surprised at how few people actually read the paper locally. And we are really the mechanism through which they're going to obtain this information. I'm sure a lot of people left here tonight and are going to be doing a little more research, but we still have a ways to go, I think.
And I think if you have, let's say, 10% people who think that we should be an independent school, 10% of the people that maybe think we should be K through 6, 10% of this population that thinks another structure might be the way to go, you add them together, for all we know, maybe half of the town wants to go in a different direction. I don't know if that's the case, but I think you said at the last meeting, we really need to get everybody's buy-in before we make the next leap. So we're not 9 months down the road with a vote.
When do you think we can get all that input?
I think we need to
What
see what
time
the
frame?
fallout is from this tonight,
Yeah.
not fallout, but we'll see what the scuttlebutt is, like what's the talk around the town, and all of us are going to have an obligation to be asking the people we know were here tonight, and just kind of take their temperature over the next month or so.
I agree with you completely that, after people leave, that's when all the questions start to
Yep.
arise.
So we have another meeting in November. I think we probably should publicize it, maybe not as to the extent we did tonight, but certainly through the town, certainly through the DNN, certainly a letter in the paper just inviting
Personally.
people back to chat with us in November, knowing that you've got a month to think about it. And get a few phone calls to other board chairs, and November 24th, I think we should make some decisions. I don't think we need to wait 3 or 4 months. I just feel like we need to let this simmer a little bit for people and give them a chance to think about it. mean, it was my impression that there were a lot of people here who knew zippo about Act 46, and that was their first.
If you go away for the summer and you came back, all of a sudden this is staring you in the face. So that's understandable.
A lot of people aren't here in the winter during the legislative session. They have no idea what's going
Yeah,
on.
I think that's going to be a chronic problem. I don't think that's just.
But our biggest supporters are also people of a certain demographic who may not be here in the winter. I mean, I
know, that's a chronic problem.
Yeah.
Summer and winter, you're always going to have,
absolutely.
it's a schizophrenic. It's really hard to get people all in the same place.
But we know people, and that's the beauty of our small community, is that we're available. People can call us, they can reach
But it's
out.
always
We
very
can
difficult to
check
know
in
whether
with
you're
them at
getting
church.
a representative sampling or not.
Well, it takes a lot to get people to something like this.
And then the people
I was
who
impressed
come.
with the number of
This
people.
is about 60 people.
It was
pretty
70,
good.
there were
I think it was
74
between
adults.
74 and 80.
Cool.
That's what I wanted.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it's, it's just,
Wow.
I find it so difficult to, I find it difficult to ever be comfortable that we really know what the town wants, and that the
Well,
town is
we won't. We
educated, knows what
can't.
they're talking about.
But I think we need to give it a little more time to bubble up.
That's fine.
Just a little
I
more
do,
time.
I'm a little, this is, maybe just because I've been to so freaking many meetings.
Yeah.
I've been dealing with this for so long that, to me, I just see, some folks starting, there is gonna be some impatience.
Well, that is something that everyone's gonna have to take a breath, because
fine.
you're in
Doesn't
totally
mean we
different
have to-
rooms.
we have to do anything about
You're in
this.
totally different rooms than everyone else at this table and everyone in this room.
Right.
And unfortunately, when you get in that grind, there is a burnout factor. Completely understand and respect that, but then you turn around and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm so much further ahead of this group, and that's just the way it is.
So what I would like to take from what you've been both saying is I would like an agenda item in the next meeting that does invite people again, and we'll make a campaign of it, but invite people again, and we'll have another leg of talking about Act 46
You want me to put
as a
an ad in the
public
paper?
meeting. Pardon?
Put an ad in the paper,
And we
that
can
kind of
put
thing?
it, yeah.
And we can say that we will be voting on the committee. We can say that the possible vote is on the agenda, or we can
So
commit to that.
let's talk about the study group and see what kind of response there
And
is.
I think that if people realize that they're actually going to vote on this, that we're actually doing this, it's real, then now's the time to ask your questions and
miss that meeting.
make your clarifications.
Good.
I may miss that meeting.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It's right
Schedule.
before Thanksgiving, and
Yeah.
I kind of, I think I may have to be out of town.
Yeah, I'll be here, but yeah, I think that's, could be tough for,
It's,
It is what it
it's
But
is.
we have school, we
Tuesday
have school
before
Tuesday, we have
Thanksgiving.
school Wednesday. A lot of people, no, we don't have school Wednesday.
So when's the meeting? Is it the Tuesday before Thanksgiving?
It was the 24th.
Yeah, that's
Tuesday
the
before
Tuesday before.
Do you want to try to
Thanksgiving.
reschedule right now on that?
I wouldn't mind.
What's happening on the, what is it, the
You want
18th,
Mary?
17th?
Oh, okay.
He's got 3 other board meetings.
Details, details.
Details,
Not a
schmetails.
problem. Let's see here.
Vicki, at some point, I want to hear what, if you have anything that you want to contribute, or any perspective you want to add?
Previous week, you're saying Tuesday night?
Yeah.
I've got something on Act 46.
do it here.
Rupert
Yeah.
people are probably, no, it's Meta Week. If you want to do the week before, I could do Monday night, the 16th, or Thursday night, the 19th.
Monday night, the 16th?
If you do Thursday, I can't be here.
Pardon?
I said if you do Thursday, I cannot be here.
I struggle with Thursdays, but that's just because I like to sing in the choir.
The following week, the
could
week
do
after
either of those.
Thanksgiving, I have Wednesday the 2nd, or Thursday the 3rd.
I'd like to, move it up a week, I think would be probably beneficial
So
to
you're
the
talking
process. and-
Monday,
and
you do
for
Monday the
everybody's
16th?
I can do the
She's-
16th.
You're saying yes, I'm okay.
16th works for me.
Monday, the 16th?
Okay.
So do we need a motion to change that date, since we made a motion to set the date?
Not really, I mean, you publish the whole calendar, but the chair, and we put on there, you can change it anytime. The chair The chair has authority to reschedule the meeting, so we're gonna do it the 16th, 6 o'clock?
That's right.
Yep.
Great.
Okay. Do you have anything that you feel moved to contribute?
No, I think it's the beginning of a long journey with people. I mean,
Do you like the idea of bringing up the issue again and
Well,
getting,
because-
not just assuming that everybody's going to approve the study group, but having more discussion option, an opportunity to discuss it again with the public invited? Okay. Thank you. And thank you guys. I mean, I didn't make it easy for you guys to give me a contrary perspective, but you did it anyway, so
Well,
thanks.
thanks for putting tonight together. I thought that was,
Yeah, you guys
I
did a
heard
great
some
job.
really good things. And,
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny, I liked, I think the data we collected on the paper is just, it's good to check in with people about what their priorities are, and it gives Rosanna a lot of information about, you know, ideas bubbling up from the community about, and I think a lot of the best ideas came from parents about what else we can be doing, and I didn't see anything on those papers that isn't doable in some capacity.
Who's going to pull it all together?
There seemed like some good stuff there.
I'm happy to pull it all together. I would be happy to do that.
That would be great.
I need help getting it to my car, however, because I have a crock pot and a pot and my book.
I think we can arrange that.
Don't mix them up. Probably papers wouldn't go well in the car.
No, you're right.
Okay, so where are we at this point?
That's it for my report, and unless you have any questions for me on some other topics.
Anyone have any other questions? Can we move to the principal's report?
Which is pretty self-explanatory.
Finally, something that's self-explanatory.
That means it'll only take an hour.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a busy month with activities, which has been good. So we've had 3 grade levels now go participate in MERC, which is a whole project aligned to the next generation science standards as well. It's not just going to MERC, it's a project that science teachers worked on with Jean Ward over the summer. So
Cool.
5th graders did their presentation of their learning on ecosystems at MERC Friday night, which was great.
How did, it went well?
Yes, it went very well.
Geez.
Yep.
One thing that came up is some concerns about dynamics and undercurrents that take place in the school. Your report is a good report of what's going on, but in terms of some of the undercurrents and some of the things that have to do with individuals and therefore who might be identified, and therefore we can't talk about in a public session. There are times, and you share stuff with me privately, but a lot of times the rest of the board is not as aware. And I'm wondering how we feel about that, if that's something that we should have executive session period, you know, after every meeting, and you can share with us if it's appropriate, if there are issues, just what are the dynamics that you're working on that are worth knowing about. I don't know how you all feel about that. And it is borderline for what's not legal, but what's fair, because we don't want individuals to be jeopardized. We're supposed to be talking about general issues, but some of the dynamics are really important for us to know, because parents come by and say, well, what about this? I heard this rumor. And I know all of you have expressed interest and concern about some of these factors at different times. So is there a mechanism that we can adopt, and we can even do it this time, we can do an executive session today, but are you and the superintendent, are you both comfortable with expanding the report so that it would allow some kind of briefing on the dynamics and undercurrents that we as, with our responsibilities, should be aware of?
So you're talking about not so much expanding the written report, but then having a just, here's a finger on the pulse of what's going on?
I think that's right. It's stuff that wouldn't necessarily I don't want, I mean, I'd love to have that written, but if it means that individuals are identifiable, then it's technically illegal for us to do that. But I think we're allowed to do stuff like that in executive session, talking about personnel or student-related issues.
Well, I definitely think there are times that it's helpful for you to be aware of situations so that, when you do hear about it, it's not getting blindsided in the grocery store.
I think it should be on an as-needed basis. I wouldn't make it a part of the formal structure of her report, because then it becomes an obligation, and that's not really appropriate because it's a personnel matter, for example. We don't want to be perceived as being in the management of the school, the business of the school that way. But I can see that there are certain things that have happened in the last year that we would definitely want to be kept abreast of, for example, so more as an as-needed component.
To politely present another perspective is if we made it routine that we went into executive session.
It wouldn't be such a red light.
It wouldn't be such a red flag to, oh no, they're talking about teachers again. Who are they talking about this time? It's their routine to do this. And so it could be anything.
We kind of adopted that with when we look at resumes as well, when we make a hire.
Right.
We just do it.
Right. So I would be inclined to make it sound like we do it more often than we only do it in emergencies.
That's fair.
Elsa, is it legitimate from a law standpoint?
It wouldn't be to have as a regular agenda item. The open meeting law would sort of frown upon that as a good approach. So you can't have a permanent, you'll see this on some boards' agendas, like an executive session, like on every agenda. It's like the call to order, and there's an executive session always on their agenda. It's ready to rock. So it should be more based on a specific issue.
And is that across the boards, in all kinds of boards, or is that just for public school and public issues?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think
because I'm on
this is
another
a
board
subject.
NGO board that says we want this every meeting.
No, it's subject to, I'm talking about specific entities that would be subject to Vermont open meeting law.
Okay.
Municipal meetings.
But you could make it practice to invite it if there is an issue during every meeting.
And
We don't have to go into
do.
it.
Right.
But
That's
you
what I
can
should
invite
do.
the topic if it's necessary to go into it.
I
I
see.
guess sounds like the best compromise.
From my perspective, one of the things that, I liked what you said at first, because, I was reading that as we're not getting an update on specific issues that we need to know about. We're getting something that's more general about, the climate of the school, and, how, which.
I'm not really sure how that qualifies though as an executive session.
I don't know how it does either, but, that's where I end up feeling, partially because, I'm not around here much. So, I don't get any real sense for what's, what, if there's tension, if there's this, if there's that,
I think it would be more
I'm kind of clueless
specific.
every once in a while. I end up getting sort of like, oh, everybody knows, like, I don't.
I think it would be more specific.
So would this, so I will exercise it. Is this a good time for us to elect to go into executive session? Are there other factors that would be useful for the board to know?
Sure.
Sure, okay. So we will do that after we finish the formal meeting, and we'll try to keep it as short as we can. I understand it's late. Appointments and resignations.
Don't have any.
Next meeting, we've already decided. Director's orders, we've signed. So I need a motion to move into executive session for personnel and student issues.
Okay.
And that's how we'll always do it at
No,
this
you can't say that.
I can't?
You can't say always. That's
No,
what you can say.
I understand
In this
that.
case.
That was off the record.
You're blowing it left and right.
If you have a specific concern.
We have a
it's personnel
specific
matter
concern
or
about
student
personnel
issue.
and student issues.
Yes. and that'd be-
So do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved from Jim, seconded from Jen.
Sure.
And all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we moved into executive session, and thank you very much.